Okay, good morning, everyone. We are now on the second day of the Visayas Regional Conference 2020 as part of the 42nd Annual Conference of the Ugnayang Pang-Aghamtao, the Anthropological Association of the Philippines. So just to start our day, um, we will have a short prayer. Okay, so good morning once again. We are now on the second day of the Visayas Regional Conference. We'd like to welcome everyone, those who were here yesterday and those who are joining us only today. So welcome to our conference. We will be having a total of 10, I think, 10 presentations now. Yesterday we had 8, and of course the keynote speech. So just to give you an idea of what we had discussed, or just to refresh your memories about what happened yesterday, So I'll just give a brief recap before we go on to the next sessions for today. Okay, so day one started off with the opening ceremonies, and there was a conference overview talking about how the conference came to be, and that there are um, 18 papers to be presented in the entire two-day conference. 11 papers in 3 sessions focus on local experiences and responses to the COVID-19 pandemic, while um, seven papers in 2 sessions focused on local experiences and responses to colonization. So we opened the conference with the keynote speech from our Professor Jobers or Jose Eleazar Bersales. He is the head of the National Committee on Museums of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, and he is also the University of San Carlos Museum Director. So his keynote address focused on how Visayan society and culture fared in the face of Spanish colonial project in the Philippines. So it was a very enlightening talk, and the open forum was also very vibrant, and even topics that were no longer discussed in the keynote were asked by the very active audiences who actively participated during the open forum. And then in the afternoon, we started with session A, focusing on religious and economic life amid the pandemic. We had 4 papers, 2 regarding the religious life amid the pandemic, festivals as well as church practices. And the other 2 were on economic life. The first was on the potters of Bohol, and the second was regarding the Ati, the indigenous people in Iloilo. Okay, so again, the open forum was very vibrant, and people were asking questions, and then there were ideas about future research that could be conducted regarding the effects or the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic that we are experiencing right now. And then right after session A, we had session B. So if session A focused on the pandemic, session B focused again on colonization and globalization's impact on agriculture, commodities, beliefs, and health. So this is actually the point of the conference. We look at parallelisms about the effects of colonization on cultures, various aspects of cultures, and effects of the COVID-19 pandemic also on various aspects of culture. So we had again 4 papers. One was on the practices of the Bohol farmers as innovated during the American occupation with the introduction of science-based techniques, but it did not totally erase the local practices of the Boholano farmers. And the second was on the globalization of the Moscovado of Antique. And another paper was looking into the local beliefs in the supernatural among people in the uplands of Argao, Cebu. And lastly, a paper regarding Hansen's disease or leprosy across the various periods of Spanish colonial, American Commonwealth, and even until now. So Again, a very vibrant open forum followed the session, and I think a lot of people picked up some insights from these papers presented. So for today, we have three more sessions. The first one is encountering the pandemic experiences from the ground. So we look into experiences from various parts of the Visayas, in Tacloban, in Iloilo, in Aklan, and in Bohol. And then the second session is on stories, narratives, and responses to colonization. And lastly, the last session E, is on encountering the new normal in education. We know that a lot of our participants are in education. We are either teachers, we are students, administrators, etc. So I think it's very timely to discuss how we encounter the new normal in education. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to the moderator for the first session this morning. Thank you and good morning again.
Good morning, everyone. Mayong buntag, maupay nga aga sa tanan. I'm Marjorie Dino. I will be the moderator for the first session this morning. Session C, Encountering the Pandemic Experiences from the Ground. I'm a faculty of the Department of Anthropology, Sociology, and History of the University of San Carlos. And for today's session, we have four presenters. And the first presenter will be discussing about the COVID-19 health emergency experience of Super Typhoon Haiyan resettlement in Tacloban. And the presenter is Ms. Lady Lynn Lim Mangada, Associate Professor in Political Science in UP Visayas Tacloban College. Her researches and publications are on disaster risk reduction, sustainable inclusive development, and local politics. She is fellow of the University of the Philippines Resilience Institute and affiliated researcher of the Stockholm Environment Institute, Asia office. She is a regular member of the National Research Council of the Philippines, the Eastern Regional Organization for Public Administration, and the Philippine Political Science Association. Let's all welcome our first speaker for today, Ms. Lady Lynn Lim Mangada. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning. Hello.
I have your presentation here, ma'am.
Ano, wait. Sandali lang. Yun! Ano, yun? Kanina ka pumalian na yun.
By the way, just to remind all the speakers, you have 15 minutes for your presentation, and also for the participants, you may ask your questions via the chat box, and also for those watching via the Facebook Live, you can comment you can post your questions in the comment section, and please don't forget to mention your name, your affiliation or institution, your question, and to whom you're addressing your questions. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Hello. Can I be heard now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I'm going to start my presentation. Good morning, everyone. Maupay na aga. Before anything else, I would like to thank the University of San Carlos for this opportunity to share, most especially for hosting the 42nd UGAT conference. For this conference, my paper is about the COVID-19 health emergency experience of the Super Typhoon Haiyan resettlement. Wait, sandali lang. Gio, bili mo na, move. Susunod ko din man na, move. Okay. Sorry. I am not technically smart, digitally smart person. We are familiar that in 2013, Haiyan devastated eastern Visayas. And as a result of the scale of devastation, the government decided to relocate people living in the seaside. And so they opted a strategy and off-site contractor-driven reconstruction. And in 2016 up to 2020, the people in the coast started to transfer to the Tacloban North, the relocation site. And they say it is a small, poorly constructed housing units, and it's far from the center, and water, health, electricity are problems there. And people in the community could hardly find the sources of income, and new risks were encountered, such as living close to the city's dump site. And they feel insecure because they don't have a document showing proof of ownership to the dwelling units. Of course, they mentioned that access to services, especially aid, were based on one's political affiliation or connection. And generally, they mentioned that their voices were not considered, they were not consulted. In 2020, we were surprised with that COVID-19 emergency. This is a highly infectious respiratory virus that threatened humanity. In fact, it enforced lockdowns, community quarantine, and travel bans. Because of that, for the people in the resettlement, they need to be what? They need to be protected, and the more that their resilience regarding their livelihood, their lives should be ensured by government. As such, this paper argues that the COVID-19 health emergency, especially the quarantine measures, further undermine their ability to achieve resilience. For my research site, as mentioned, the Tacloban's North Resettlement is located 40 kilometers from the city center. It used to be the Eastern Visayas Agro-Industrial Growth Center and was rezoned as a relocation site. In 2016 and 17, there were actually 21 housing units, and 12 coming from the National Housing Authority and 9 from the NGOs. The NHA was supposed to generate 16,327 units, while NGOs committed to 8,375 housing units. Today, in 2020, the Tacloban North Resettlement has 31 housing communities, which are being hosted by 9 barangays in Tacloban City, in Tacloban North. And the first recorded COVID-19 infection in the city was in a barangay hosting this, relocatees. Today, they have 0 infection. Okay. For the methods of this paper, it was a combination of mobile and face-to-face interviews. Of course, what helped much was my pre-existing ties with the people on the ground. I was able to interview 5 punong barangays, 9 presidents or officers of the homeowners associations, 6 key department heads from the national government agencies and the local government units, and the conduct of the field work was interrupted by the spate of severe tropical storms which affected this and last month. The paper is anchored on the concept of resilience. Resilience, from the Latin word resilio, means to leap or spring back. A lot of people has put forward their views on resilience, but the common term is always capacity. It's capacity to what? To respond to an emergency, to recover, and to adapt. So it is not going back to the original state, but rather one has to learn, grow, adapt, and be transformed. Rather, today, it's easier to understand resilience with building back forward. Hindi po building back bitter, nagiging bitter na yung iba. Today, the resilience framework has built back better and sustainable socio-economic development. When people talk about the COVID-19, they always associate that with health and economic impacts. But today, from the lens of the barangay officials and the homeowners association, I'm going to share with you the challenges aside from health and economics. From the economic point of view, most of the people in the pabahay experienced reduced income to lost wages. They were fishers before they transferred there, and most of them transitioned to become tricycle and pedicab drivers. Others were working in the carinderia in the city. Others were employed as construction workers, market vendors, and hairdressers. For most of the people, it was economic hardship, and in fact, they were not part of the panic buying for fear of food shortage this pandemic. One barangay official made mention about our relocatee going to the barangay hall, and these are the quotes. He was saying that the pabahay people do not have stable incomes because they are fishers, and one of the homeowners association leader mentioned that it was difficult to earn 500 pesos a day, and that being as a fish vendor, there was also a decline in the supply of fish. A mother homeowner association leader said that her daughter was hired, but due to lockdown, she lost her job. In the health aspect, people in the relocation site were reluctant to go to the hospital. In fact, they say that better to die at home than the hospital, because at home there is a wake, while the hospital, one is placed in the plastic bag and it is hastily buried. What a lonely death. Whenever they feel na hindi sila maganda ang pakiramdam, they would make use of herbs. So they practice herbal medicine. That reaction, I think, was a result of the much publicized COVID infection of most of the medical workers in the Eastern Visayas regional medical centers and frontliners in the different private hospitals in the city. During the pandemic, the barangay officials and the homeowners association leaders were exposed to the following social challenges. One, they noted that the young people were violating the curfew, and these young people would readily organize get-together with friends. They were fond of gallivanting in the neighborhood. They also, took note of the usual, more conflicts would be settled, and they attribute that to the absence of income. And then again, people were going to the barangay hall to look for food. And in fact, one of the barangay captains said she referred a woman to do a laundry so that she can buy something to eat. In terms of education, this was their observation. And they said that it was the mother who was involved, not the child. And it was more challenging if a mother has 5 children and 3 were in school because she could not attend to the 3 kids. Another made mention about a mother who reached only grade 2 but was trying to tutor her children who were enrolled in grades 4 and 6. And so they said, what can she teach? Times have changed, and teacher roles and responsibilities have been transferred to the parents. As to the water, they said there's still no water yet, and it's difficult when one has a home quarantine resident because the said person would leave the house to get water. Again, they reiterated that the housing units were too small and there was no space, especially for social distancing, and it was not conducive to teaching and learning. So regarding connectivity, since the relocation site is located outside the city, there was inadequate access to digital information and technology, especially when DepEd transitioned to modular and CHED to online or remote learning, people struggled. In fact, they noticed that some students in the college level dropped out from school, and they struggled to allocate money to pay for data. Actually, the digital learning, discriminate some people, especially those who have limited access to gadget and technology. And for political, since the people in the seaside were transferred to that area, they did not, they still keep their old affiliation, so that the host barangays made mention of their problem regarding the correct identification of beneficiaries, and the experienced duplication of aid, and that their barangay IRA services were affected. This is a call to execute to implement the local government code provision and the creation, abolition, or merging of barangays. For barangay officials and the homeowners association, they worked together in enforcing quarantine measures. They were on the lookout for incoming locally stranded individuals. And Balik Provincia, they mandated the use of outdoors. They organized a vegetable garden, produced organic fertilizer, plant vetiver to minimize erosion. And since the relocation site was used as a quarantine facility of the city, they took note of a quarantined person who went out to stab a friend shortly after midnight because no one was monitoring. And then a barangay official was frustrated because he learned that some of the resettled used the vacant unoccupied units for their friends as a facility. And an officer of the homeowners association mentioned that he was not informed that there were new patient being placed in the resettlement site, and it was scary because the LSI was going around the pabahay. So this is an implication on operational coordination between the city and other levels of government. This is about transparency and communication. Another issue that really made things quite controversial in the resettlement was the non-engineered house repairs and improvements. For those who just retired and who have regular income, they started repairing their housing units. And for the NHA housing units, it was okay because according to them, it was substandard. But for non-NHA housing units, it was not okay because it would compromise the structural integrity of the row houses. The National Housing Authority said it's okay to repair, but the city housing unit said it is not, and the repairs and improvements were not allowed during the pandemic, and it requires approval coming from the city engineer's office. And to offset the negative impacts of COVID-19 and to have a hope for a resilient future in the resettlement site, here are some of the recommendations. I think there is a need to prioritize and heed the voices of the low-income groups. There is a need to provide economic support and social protection to the vulnerable or at-risk sectors of the community. Then we need to continue and expand agro and ecological activities in selected housing sites. Then the different HOAs need to coordinate with the CTLGU and NHA to address structural modification of the row houses. The different homeowners association also need to be mentored on the approaches, policies, and strategies toward resilience resettlement. We need also to support the education sector to remove barriers in student participation. And finally, the COMELEC and DIG need to schedule an on-site registration of the relocatees. Here are some of the pictures. So that's one. Water is being delivered to them. Then the other picture is about a learning site that was that collapsed after it was constructed when a typhoon passed by eastern Visayas. That's the Basurahan. And here there is an example of an overextension of a house. Thank you so much for listening. Good morning.
Thank you so much, Professor Mangada. That's actually a very interesting discussion regarding the challenges encountered by those people who were put into the resettlement area or resettled in Typhoon High resettlement in Tacloban. And for your questions, again, I just want to remind the participants to put your questions in the comment section via our chat window and also in the comment section on the Facebook Live page. Thank you so much. Right, so our next presenter is Ms. Frances Antia Aredesan. She is an assistant professor at the Division of Social Sciences, University of the Philippines, Visayas. She is teaching courses in Philippine history, Asian studies, gender and sexuality, and she earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science, double major in history from the same university in 2013. She finished her Master of Arts in History from the Ateneo de Manila University in 2019. Her research interests are on World War II history, women's studies, local and cultural studies, histories. Let's all welcome Ms. Frances Anthea Arredison.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Anthea. I'm from the University of the Philippines, Visayas, and today I'll be presenting my paper entitled Why Translations Matter, the COVID-19 Response of Ibahay Aklan. So as we all know, the pandemic caused by the spread of the COVID-19 virus has immensely impacted the lives of many Filipinos. And for the past 7 months, local government units faced the challenges of the community quarantine that affected the operations of businesses, work, school, and of course, it altered our daily lives. So during the earlier months of the pandemic, many people were confused and misinformed about the novel virus. And hence, access to reliable information is vital in the management of this public health crisis, for many of these concepts are still new and alien to the community. In this paper, I will look at how the translations of COVID-19 related information had shaped the community-led initiatives of the local government of Ibahay Aklan. So language, information, and the pandemic, what do we know so far? So in a recent paper published by Ingrid Piller, Ji Zhang and Ji Li in this 2020 entitled Linguistic Diversity in a Time of Crisis, Language Challenges of the COVID-19 Pandemic, they explored how the multilingual crisis communication emerged as a global challenge during the COVID-19 pandemic by particularly focusing on the experience of China. Their primary concern was to identify the public health information needs of multilingual populations and how these needs were or were not being addressed. And based on the response to their call for papers, they were able to arrive at an argument that knowledge dissemination was woefully limited to a small number of languages and public health information is widely inaccessible, particularly because of the dominance of English-centric global mass communication. So looking at China's experience, they found out that Putonghua, the standard variety of Chinese Mandarin, but not spoken by some ethnic groups in China, was insufficient to reach everyone in the nation and ensure the widest possible compliance with public health directives. A combination of language barriers on the one hand and low levels of trust in official communications on the other have made minority populations particularly vulnerable to misinformation and fake news. So in the Philippines, there are various efforts that were made to translate the COVID-19 information. And these are mostly grassroots generated initiatives and particularly led by the University of the Philippines. Also co-founded by Ingrid Piller, Language on the Move, a peer-reviewed sociolinguistics research site devoted to multilingualism, notes that Filipino and English fails to reach all the ethno-linguistic groups in the Philippines, and thus initiatives like Project Campana, Language Warriors PH, and Regale are some of the few programs committed to reach communities by translating COVID information to other local languages. For the locale of the study, a third-class municipality, Ibahay Aklan in Western Visayas, made notable efforts in the COVID-19 information campaign by translating medical technologies and using online information campaign, as well as translating government advisories in the local language of Akranon. This paper utilized key informant interviews, featured articles, Facebook posts, printed materials, and audiovisual recordings that were made available for the public through the LGU Ibahay Information Board. So the LGU Ibahay Information Board. So as early as March 21, 2020, the local government unit actually tapped UP alumni and UP students to help them with their COVID-19 response. And one of the proposals of UP Ibayhanon was to create a centralized source of information. And this led to the creation of the LGU Information Board. And what we also suggested was to make this information, of course, available to the public through social media, but most importantly, translate everything in Akranon so that people would understand what is going on, and they would act accordingly based on the information that they know based on the site. And we also indicated that the information board is the only authorized page to give updates on COVID-19 in the municipality. So there are cases that I think in many LGUs that like some local, their local chief executive or their other head of offices would also give out information. So what we did with Ibahay was to create a centralized source of information. Thus, we had this information board. So one of the first things that we did in LGU Information Board was to translate COVID. What is COVID-19? And there are already many accounts or translations about accounts about the COVID-19, but there is none in Akranon. So what we did was to translate what is COVID and what are the symptoms of COVID-19 as early as March 21. And what we did as well was to put the source. So everything that we post, they are all source-based from World Health Organizations, from Department of Health, from Johns Hopkins University, to ensure the public that the information that they get from the information board are reliable and correct. Not only did we translate COVID-19 related information, but we also introduced these new terms. So in the first months, especially the first weeks, we were bombarded with concepts such as PUI, PUM, confirmed cases. And because of our unfamiliarity with these new concepts, we tend to, it created confusion and of course at the same time spread of fake news. So what we did was we coordinated and we closely worked with local doctors, both in Ibahay, in the province, and some of the doctors in Manila, and we gave them some of the Akranon translations. And they tried to look at whether the translations are fit the medical terminologies. We are not saying that we are experts in translations, but what we did is to ensure that that this new translation could give a similar or could actually inform the public better by using the local language. So even new classifications, we have the old and the new so that they could also compare and contrast the new terminologies used by the Department of Health. Not only did we translate some of the terms, we also constantly daily post updates about cases in the 35 barangays of Ibahay. So this is for awareness. And of course, what the result was, even the communities were also policing each other. And people knew what was going on because of this daily updates. And as early as March 25, we had the updates or the numbers per barangay. And then the latest that we posted is on November 27, 2020. Now we are tracing the ROF and the LSI. Okay. Aside from using the Facebook as a digital platform, we also use multiple platforms, such as like the use of flyers, posters, and audiovisual recordings, because we also want to make sure that communities who do not have access to Wi-Fi or internet connection or even phone signal have a way for them to understand the COVID-19. So we gave barangay captains copies of audiovisual or visual recordings that they could play in their barangay with their speakers. We have a constant playing of the mayor's audio recordings in the public places like the public market and the municipal hall. So these are some of the efforts for us to address communities who do not have access to social media or internet connection. And most importantly, this is very common nowadays, the spread of fake news. So what we did was to constantly post official announcements or official statements from the LGU, and we remind the public to be accountable to the information that they give, because they could actually be fined or it could be imprisoned. So we constantly remind them to not spread fake news. And not only did we translate new normal protocols, we also translated local and national policies that also help in one way or another in information dissemination of new laws in related to COVID-19. Also linked to that, because of the translation in Akranon, most of the succeeding programs, COVID-related, now the LGU named it in Akranon. Like we have the Ayuda Naton, the relief operations of the LGU, wherein the barangay officials will give the relief goods house to house to avoid contact. Then the LGU was also received overwhelming support in terms of their donation drive. They called it Ibahayanihan. And we made sure that we post donated goods, the amount of money, to ensure the public that there is transparency. So posting of donations help people to encourage to donate more, and it also assisted the LGU in their finances and their relief operations. So not only did the LGU did what I have mentioned, it also did consultations in the barangay level and even with their employees. So there are now long-term plans for COVID-related concerns. And one of the most notable projects or programs of the LGU was the Libot Ibahay, or the mobile market. Libot in Akano means mobile selling. So it has also been recognized by the Department of Interior Local Government, as well as the Information Board, as one of the best practices in Aklan, as well as we also got featured with Manila Bulletin and other local and national platforms. So the role of the LGU, the health sector, and civil society organizations, and of course, primarily the community. The community, with the translation, why do translations matter? So these are the answers of my key informants. So the community understood the situation better. And it was no longer difficult for the barangay officials to explain to them what was going on, because it was easy to understand and the community was well aware. Also, because they could constantly hear reminders in Akranon, there is a sense of familiarity with the language. And thus, there's also an acknowledgement that not everyone knows or comprehends English. So thus, the use of Akranon as mother tongue gives a sense of familiarity to the people. And most importantly, these educational campaigns disseminated correct and reliable information. And because of this reliable information, we were able to empower communities because people are now more aware, and it eliminated unnecessary fear, the spread of fake news. Of course, it's not perfect, but we are trying our best. And because most of the information that we get from social media or from the news are all written in English or in Filipino. So the initiative to work with the LGU, with UP, UP alumni and students, as well as other private sectors, help in the COVID-19 response of Ibahay. And most importantly, the sense of urgency of information to be made available to the public. So in conclusion, information is power. So here, in the experience of Ibahay, the use of digital and multiple platforms for information dissemination was successful, or were successful in informing the public. And we also highlighted the responsible use of social media, and reliable information is vital to minimize the spread of fake news. That's the last thing that we want in this time of the pandemic. And people need to understand the situation so they can act rationally in these times of crisis. And because they are well aware, they are more likely to trust their local government because they see transparency, and they are likely to comply to new normal protocols and laws. And lastly, the LGU made considerable moves on coordinating with various stakeholders. And by using the local language Akranon, to spread awareness about the pandemic, the community is better informed, cooperative, and proactive in observing new normal protocols. The experience of Ibahay proves that our local language plays an important role in combating this public health crisis, empowering vulnerable sectors, and democratizing the source of information. So maabugid nga salamat sa gihapon One Ibahay Against COVID. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Francis, for that very insightful presentation. I think your presentation actually showed that one of the best practices, if not actually the best practice of the LGU in partnership with the academe, health sector, civil society, and the local community in combating COVID-19. Thank you so much for that presentation, ma'am. All right, and our next presenter is Mr. Romeo Filar Caditaro, an Instructor 1 and Chairman of the Social Science Department, West Visayas State University, Pototan Campus. He is a former Master Teacher 1, Faculty Association President, and Board of Director of the Parent Teacher Association, and as Chairman of the Gender and Development Committee and Debate and Chess Coach of Haro National High School. He is a graduate of Bachelor of Science, Major Social Studies, and Master of Arts in Sociology of Central Philippine University, and finished his Doctor of Philosophy in Social Science at West Visayas State University. He is also the president of Asosasyon ng mga Dalubhasa, May Hilig at Interes sa Kasaysayan ng Pilipinas Incorporated, and he has also published a number of books. Let's all welcome Mr. Romeo Filar Caditaro.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, UGAT members, fellow
Yes.
UGAT members. My paper is entitled, yes, ma'am, can you please show my
Yes,
slide?
sir.
Okay, so my paper is entitled Iloilo City, a model approach for combating COVID-19. So again, I'm Dr. Romeo Filar Caditaro of West Visayas State University, Pototan Campus. And my abstract, could you please show my abstract, ma'am?
Kita na ka, sir? Kita na nimo?
Ang next slide naman.
Okay.
This is my abstract. So, yes, when we, can you enlarge the font, ma'am? It's quite small. So when COVID-19 this disease struck, a developing country like ours, as we can see, we are all stunned, and given the situation, my paper will describe how Iloilo City would respond to this pandemic. Okay, so next slide, please. I will not read everything from my abstract, considering of our time, a limited time. Could you please proceed to my next slide? So my paper is based on one of the theoretical theory that will anchor that this paper is anchored is on the philosophy of Iranian old philosophy, that Goftarinik, Pindarinik, and Takindarinik, which means good words and good reflections and good deeds. As we can later on, I will enumerate how the city of Iloilo manage the pandemic. No? So we have several resources, no, in the internet, no, regarding the origin of the pandemic, no, and how this started, no, and then from Wuhan, China, to the Philippines, and then later on they spread all throughout the Philippines and also in Iloilo City. So we have also learned that the actions of the government, the different agencies of the government, like the forming of IETF, no, um, the leadership of our president, Rodrigo Duterte. And then we also experience, like for example, the enhanced community quarantine, and with the Honorable Carlo Nogales heading our interagency task force. So at least this is the preliminary preparation of our country towards this pandemic. Next slide now. So I will not elaborate because I want to show, I will show more focus on the things that Iloilo City have done during this pandemic. Why I would like to answer the question why the Iloilo City government and Iloilo City in general have a good practices with regards to combating COVID-19. Please proceed to the next slide, ma'am. So we know for a fact that there are celebrities. Yes, ma'am. Okay. So we know for a fact that there are celebrities and there are ambassadors, there are senators. In Iloilo City, we have also some victims of COVID-19. And two of our leaders, for example, the vice mayor was tested positive. And also, Honorable J. Trenyas, our city councilor, was also tested positive. Fortunately, they were able to survive. And then this is now the meat of my presentation. So the research was taken from different materials coming from internet and from other media, and social media. And because we are living in a pandemic, as a researcher, our ethnographic study is focused on hands-off type of research. So Iloilo City, as a role model in fighting COVID-19, so they also assist in the testing of all contact persons of the positive. They also develop isolation centers with comfort rooms. In Iloilo, the mayor made Jubilee Hall as temporary shelter for person under monitoring and person under investigation. So what we did here in Iloilo is a sort of bayanihan, and despite conflict sometimes, it is expected that when you have a new problem like this COVID-19, there are some instances that the city government have conflict with the Department of Education. Like when the city government asked the use of our one of our school here, that the principal refused to accept that idea, and but fortunately we have more and more halls that were open. Like for example, one school, the John B. Lacson Colleges Foundation offered one of their ship, used for their schooling, as a home for the frontliners. So there are many other agencies that have a bayanihan during this COVID pandemic. Like for example, we also increase we have the Visayas Medical Center as the test hub, and then later on we extend that to Don Benito Hospital, and then the Santa Barbara Sanitarium. So that is one of the positive the one of the discovery of this paper is the spirit that the Ilonggos, no? Like for example, another discovery is the consistent, no? Distribution of free rice, sardines, and noodles, no? And of course, during the lockdown, especially during the lockdown, and even last week, no, our congresswoman, Jam Jam Barunda, gave our barangay, for example, one banyera of fish. So these are again, positive or a model for combating COVID-19 or during the pandemic, no? The leaders strive, no, to extend or help to the population. Another slide, ma'am. So, hello, ma'am.
Yes, yes, sir. Can you, sir?
Hello, ma'am.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Next slide. Next slide. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Next slide, ma'am. Okay. So one thing that is also unique, if not, no, if you can observe that to other provinces like in Aklan, no, in Ibahay, no, is the our government officials were able to get the support of our um, volunteers, and I think that is one also of the good or best practices that we have. No? We have also fogging. In fact, this fogging is also a controversial one, no? Because some are saying that fogging might endanger the health, but during the enhanced community quarantine, fogging were done in Iloilo City. I think if the fogging were not able to limit the COVID-19, at least it brings awareness to the community on how deadly, how deadly this virus. And then with regards to donation, one thing that I observed about Iloilo City is that they did not think only of Iloilo City as a victim. We even distributed goods and support to victims of Typhoon Ulysses in the current typhoons. So that is not the only donation that we receive aside from the PPEs. We have donations like including programs in the beautification programs of the Iloilo City, like old tires or something like that. So it boils down to the idea that indeed, Iloilo City community, and through the able leadership of our mayor, we're really concerned, and our mayor, our city mayor, even cried during the time when during one of the flag ceremonies, that he never expected the COVID-19 pandemic, and yet he showed to us leadership that were very important. I think that is one. In fact, our mayor, Jerry Treñas, was invited in one forum together with 5 other mayors to show this what we are doing here in Iloilo City are considered to be our best practices. So that's why my title of my paper is Combating COVID, Iloilo City as a role model in combating COVID-19. We even have distribution of Ilonggo Pandesal volunteers. And then the last thing that we did is the formation of exit plan. So like what we Ibahay local government units have asked the assistance of knowledgeable people, our city mayor and our city also asked the help of UP professors to have the formation of exit plan. But despite of the continuous cases of COVID-19, we were able uh, to have our plan in place. So to summarize, no, we in Iloilo City, my paper is focused on the different activities, the different action taken by our city government and our community as a whole in combating COVID-19, and that includes accepting and donating goods, and also with the different coordination with the different agencies and bayanihan. Uh, uh, um, Despite of the advancement in this science and technology, all were proven to be futile. No? So the first countries were shocked and frantic. No? There is a book about like for example in the AIDS pandemic, no, by Ferranti, no, that this pandemic, uh, I think that one of the problem that we are facing is that there might be a first and then the second wave of attack, no, of this pandemic. So I hope that despite of this pandemic, no, this paper has presented the different phases of COVID-19 with the focus on how Iloilo City tried to manage, no, though it may be in the micro level of analysis, no, symbolically it was intertwined with global factors, no, through the able leadership of Honorable Jerry Treñas. No, several initiatives were undertaken, of course, with the direction on top. No. What was striking was the fact that despite of the limited resources coming from both the national and the local government agencies, many observers that the way the Mayor Treñas handles this pandemic is better, if not the best management across the country. Such initiatives have addressed the various gaps. That is why I am calling it as the role model in combating COVID-19. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Ugat. Thank you, good ma'am. Tamo nga salamat.
Damo nga salamat, Sir Gitaro, and thank you for that very interesting presentation regarding the efforts of Iloilo City in combating COVID-19 pandemic. All right, and our next presenter, they will be presenting the three staff of National Museum Bohol will be presenting this paper. So we have Ms. Audrey Don Tumada, Administrative Officer 5 and Head of the National Museum of the Philippines, Bohol. Ms. Tumada is in charge of museum operations and is responsible for monitoring and restoration and reconstruction projects of the National Museum in Bohol. She's interested in anthropology and built heritage conservation. The other presenter is Ms. Athena G. Vitor, is the museum technician of the National Museum Bohol and takes charge in the maintenance of national collections. Ms. Vitor also served as Heritage Sites Management Assistant for the National Museum of the Philippines Restoration and Reconstruction Project in Bohol. She's interested in cultural studies and archaeology. The next presenter also is Ms. Rachel C. Lacia, the Administrative Officer of the National Museum Bohol and holds a degree in Business Administration. Ms. Lacia formerly served as the Secretary of the Commission on Cultural Heritage of the Church of the Diocese of Tagbilaran. She's interested in heritage management and preservation. Let's all welcome our presenters, Ms. Tomada and Ms. Vitor and Ms. Lacia. Thank you.
So good morning. We are here to discuss about museums in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly the National Museum of the Philippines in Bohol, where we look at crisis as opportunity. Oops. To start play.
Click na to kang arrow, ma'am. Kanang arrow sa lower left part. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Wait here. So how did the pandemic affect the museums worldwide? The International Council of Museums released 2 survey reports in April, May 2020, and in September, October 2020, taken from the 1,600 responses from museums and museum professionals in 107 countries. 94.7% of the total respondents closed their museums because of the pandemic. During the lockdown, many museums enhanced their digital activities. Most museum professionals work remotely, and almost all museums around the world reduced their activities. So the ICOM second survey in September-October 2020 showed that after 4 months, most museums in Europe and Asia were open, the majority were closed in Latin America, and the situations were mixed in the other regions. Museums continued to enhance their digital activities. Museum professionals have resumed work on site again, but working from home is still widely encouraged or enforced. 14% of the respondents stated that part of the staff were laid off. Almost all museums around the world have to reduce their resources and activities, and security procedures and the conservation of heritage in museums continued throughout the lockdown. How about the museums in Central Visayas? In July 2020, the NCCA, National Committee on Museums, did a survey for each of their regional museum associations across the country. In Central Visayas Association of Museums, they were able to survey 29 existing museums in Cebu, Bohol, Dumaguete, and Siquijor, including the National Museum Bohol. Of the 29 museums, 51.7% of the museums were completely closed and no staff at work. 31% were partially open for staff to work. 13.8% were open for all staff to work. As for the status of exhibitions program for 2020-2021, 34.5% have been postponed. Another 34.5% were unsure, and 10.3% got canceled, and 20.7% had no programmed exhibitions. The National Museum Bohol is part of the network of the National Museum of the Philippines, which is an educational and scientific institution and a cultural center that acquires, preserves, and fosters scholarly studies on works of arts, specimens, and artifacts representative of the cultural and natural heritage of the Philippines. Established in 2007, the National Museum Bohol is currently housed at the old provincial capital in Tagbilaran since 2018. In 2019, the Republic Act number 11333 was enacted, strengthening the National Museum of the Philippines. So other than the National Museum Bohol, the National Museum manages 3 flagship museums in Manila, the National Planetarium, and 17 museums nationwide, with 3 more opening soon. In addition, admission is free for all museums since 2016. So due to COVID-19 pandemic, the National Museum Network has been closed to the public since March 13, 2020, until further notice. So what happened to the National Museum Bohol? Prior to closing our galleries, the National Museum Bohol's number of visitors was increasing. The museum then was accepting visitors from diverse backgrounds and age groups. As early as January, we started offering dedicated tours and lectures to highlight our gallery exhibitions. The National Museum Bohol team was also in the process of preparing for approved proposals for future face-to-face activities within the museum. However, with the pandemic, work did not stop for the personnel of the National Museum. The museum galleries and office were disinfected. Even though we were understaffed, we were operating on a skeletal workforce arrangement and continued with essential work, paperwork, and building and collections maintenance. At the time, National Museum Bohol team was optimistic that by May, the galleries will be open again to the public, since we were also preparing for our museum programs for Heritage Month, which included a weaving lecture demonstration, workshop, and series of lectures. So on site, the National Museum Bohol personnel continued to conduct preventive conservation of collections. The National Museum Bohol occupies Bohol's old Capitol building, which had been declared an important cultural property by the NMP. It was damaged during the 7.2 magnitude earthquake in 2013. The NMP restored the building as part of the agency's restoration and reconstruction in the Visayas. Closure of the galleries to the public meant an opportunity for major maintenance work necessary for the upkeep of this built heritage. So a major concern for the National Museum Bohol at the time was the leaking at Gallery 2 from the azotea. The closure gave us ample time to address this concern. The building's stone masonry needed repointing and corrective measures. The facade also needed to be cleaned.
So aside from our work inside the museum, we continue with our off-site work, restoration and reconstruction work in the local, and on, which requires us to regularly monitor the site and coordinate with stakeholders.
I'm sorry, ma'am. I think there's actually a problem with Miss Athena's microphone.
Okay.
I'm echo.
Okay, so document.
Echo gihapon, ma'am. I think you can use Miss Audrey's na lang kuan.
Yeah, okay. Yes.
And then make sure to mute your microphone and then use Miss Audrey's screen na lang and then also the microphone.
Okay. Sorry. So we regularly monitor the sites, coordinate with stakeholders and our partners for inspections. And then the National Museum also tries its best to work closely with locals, so we update them of our project status and consult them to address concerns in the restoration, especially now that we are almost complete with the structural phase and have moved on to the details of the ceiling paintings, retablos, and other sculptural works. So these things locals are more familiar with. Documentation of features is also an essential task. Key in restoration work is the proper documentation of features discovered in the course of the project. In the event of accidental finds, we have to document and if we have to, salvage these features as soon as possible. In addition to our ongoing projects, we also monitor declared and restored sites. So in the picture on the left, this is the entrance arch to the cemetery in Panglao. When we checked the site, there was an unauthorized construction, so we have to resolve that. And the picture on the left. And then the picture on the right is a portion of the Lamanok petrographs in Anda, Bohol. The Lamanok Archaeological Complex was recently declared important cultural property, so we had to visit the site and check its status as well. During this pandemic, there were a series of strandings, sea turtles and marine mammals, particularly dolphins. So one of our senior researchers from the Zoology Division, Dr. Jo Marie Acebes, was visiting family in Bohol when the lockdown and travel restrictions were imposed. Her presence in the province gave the NM Bohol team an opportunity to observe and learn the process of handling zoological specimens. And though it is part of our mandate to collect specimens, we were not expecting that these strandings will happen at a time like this. So with restricted travel, it was a challenge for us to preserve the specimens since our taxidermist is based in Manila. So we had to tap local community for their support and a local university so we could use their laboratory for necropsy. But the good thing here is we have to learn the basics of taxidermy. We were also lucky to connect with some student volunteers who helped us in the process. Training citizen scientists is also part of the mandate of the National Museum. Then with the proliferation of webinars, of course, we grabbed some opportunities to learn new skills online and to remotely provide technical assistance to our clients. Online conferences, seminars, and trainings provided opportunities for NM Bohol personnel to participate without having to be away from the museum for days, just as what we are doing today. We provided technical assistance to the youth of Vegan during their 2020 online Youth Heritage Congress. And we worked with the NCCA and the LGU of San Fernando Romblon for the online training on movables and immovables for their cultural mappers. Now, when our doors closed, we turned to social media to reach out to the public and stay relevant. We were still in ECQ in May, which is the time of the year that is very important to Boholanos. May is fiesta season, and it is usually during this time that Boholanos in other parts of the Philippines or abroad come home to visit family. So it was difficult. It was a difficult time for many of us. At this time, our social media posts started to focus on traditions that define Bohol and the Boholanos, and we relate these to our collections and projects. We were featuring Bohol's culinary heritage, giving emphasis on the process and technology in producing the traditional dishes and local wine. So, tuba, which surprisingly garnered quite a lot of likes and reactions. In featuring Bohol's culinary heritage, we shared selected artifacts from our ethnographic collection. At this point, we were getting feedback from Boholanos or Kaliwat Bolanon who were away from the province, commenting that our posts reminded them of home. Then we revisited some of the traditional crafts of Bohol and shared them on our post as well. Our aim is for these crafts to feature in future full-blown research. So we started with the now re-established Saguran weaving in Tubigon and its neighboring towns, and also the vanishing tradition of lumpot or cotton weaving in Dawis. We shared about our asinti buok as well, a tradition that goes all the way back, most likely to pre-colonial times, as Alcina called this the Sal de Visayas. Last July, we revisited the Asinan site where they processed the salt, and there was only one salt hut left. We were still able to buy some asinti buok in the market, and we were able to talk to the salt pot maker. Although we are aware that there are concerns about the continuity of the salt making industry, partly because of its pandemic, we're still hoping for it to sustain. Then we featured the Dawis jewelry making, which is also a dying tradition. We're looking forward to develop a program that could help in its revival. And then we received a donation, the second conferred megalodon tooth specimen from Bohol. This happened at the height of lockdowns around the country and some parts of the world. For some reason, it went viral. But more importantly, the donation paved the way for creating a pool of citizen scientists. These are the same group of friends who volunteered to help us in the taxidermy of the turtle. They also assisted us in checking the fossil bed where the tooth was found. Now, during the pandemic, the National Museum of the Philippines launched the Museum from Home series. We started sharing weekly serial posts on our social media featuring artifacts and specimens from the national collections housed here at the museum, as well as heritage sites and structures. This endeavor kick-started NM Bohol's digitization of its collection. Eventually, this will make up the museum's digital database. So we have Sacred Sundays, and then it's either Marine Mondays or Mineral Monday, Techno Tuesday, Tropical Thursday, and Scenic Saturdays.
October is a very special month for us museum workers since we are celebrating the Museums and Galleries Month 2020. And in Bohol, launched different video tours exhibitions showcasing the different galleries of our museum. We have also launched a video anniversary commemorating the Bohol 2013 earthquake featuring the remaining 3 ongoing restoration projects of the NMP, the churches of San Pedro Apostol Parish in Loboc, Santa Cruz Parish in Maribojoc, and Berhen sa Casilac in Loon. To share with you our milestones in social media, as you can see, we were already happy with at least 50 likes or reactions from our post. In April, we started focusing with NM Bohol's social media presence. Today, some of our posts reach up to 200 or even 300 likes or reactions plus comments from our followers, readers, which means we're gaining traction in terms of online engagement. Last July 2020 was our highest number of total page views that reached 3,665 on Facebook. With regards to our page reach, we started with around 1,500 page like in February. We now have more than 8,500 likes. This might be a small number comparing to other museum pages, but to us, this is a success indicator. In visitor diversity, it is also assuring to know the profile of our followers in terms of gender and locality that guides us in engaging our audience. We have seen also repeat online visits and engagements. At this point, we have transformed the NM Bohol page from a merely bulletin of our activities into an educational tool and resource. On July 2020, our total page reach was 853,308. The NM Bohol is committed to take these next steps to continue with enhanced digital and online activities as corollary educational programs, preparing for the eventual reopening of the museum once we are authorized and putting in place safety protocols for the museum building and museum personnel and museum visitors. And part of our preparation will be the installation of laboratory equipment and materials needed as a scientific institution. And without travel restrictions, we'll be able to pursue full-blown researches in the national collections we revisited in our storage. As our conclusion, the crisis was an opportunity to shift and enhance digital and online activities to bring the museum into homes and stay relevant using available technology and social media platforms such as Facebook. An opportunity to share collections online or public appreciation to engage and inspire people in this time of pandemic and connect viewers as well as the community back to their roots. The National Museum continues to be an access and space for the protection and promotion of national collections and as information resource. While the National Museum Bohol is closed to the public, we are presented with time and opportunity to revisit old research sites and make new ones, collect new knowledge, artifacts, and specimens. At the same time, to rediscover new strengths and develop new skills. In fulfillment of the National Museum of the Philippines mandate in the preservation, conservation, and promotion of natural and cultural heritage, the National Museum Bohol overcame restrictions of public access by utilizing the digital platform and online interactivity in educating the public and stakeholders, whereas space limitations and lack of facilities have turned into creative opportunities, especially in engaging the community in the delivery of our programs. Museums, especially government museums such as the National Museum Bohol, have the indispensable role to disseminate Filipino legacy and bring heritage closer to the people despite restrictions and lockdowns, and therefore must persist, adapt, and transform. Museums as spaces for people to converge, connect, and learn play an essential role in rebuilding local economy and supporting sustainable tourism and cultural development. As National Museum says, see you pohon, may it be online or offline.
Thank you so much, National Museum Bohol. We're done with the presentations of all the papers. So we're going to proceed with the question and answer in the open forum. So please don't forget to write or share your questions in the comment section, and don't forget to specify your affiliation, your name, and to whom your question is being addressed. Okay, so we have one question from BB Monkey. Okay, let me. All right, so this is directed to all speakers. I just want to ask about disaster and resilience research. We all know that it's a bit underrepresented in the discourse, especially in the government, the funding of Project NOAA and the USD. I don't know how this proposed Department of Disaster Resilience will work as of now. But the general sentiment is that we don't put so much attention to disaster research, which is ironic because we're in the Pacific Ring. So my question is, good to know that there are efforts in partnering the academe and government, but how receptive are the LGUs there in the Visayas to disaster and resilience research in general? Especially when it comes to funding. Do they infuse expert opinion in their preventive mitigation and post-disaster efforts? Also, how is the harmonizing and uniting of ordinances by different LGUs? I think we'll start with Ms. Professor Mangada.
Good morning. While it is not within the scope of my paper that I presented, I don't have first-hand information about how their efforts are being done. What I know as of the moment is that for the city government of Tacloban, we are complete with all the plans. We have DRR plans, we have CLUP, the CCA plans. These have been revised and complied. The issue, I think, is the implementation. As to whether the local government units seek the expertise of the scientists and other experts, that I cannot really give you a good answer, because I think there are LGUs who are not yet ready to for other sectors to participate, because actually if local government units would allow experts, other groups to participate, that means better output, better performance. We can help in the monitoring, we can help in the implementation, but sadly, if local government units are still engrossed with partisan politics, they are not ready to receive feedback, much more get expert advice, especially if it is against the agenda of a ruling political family or elite. So far, that's it. But regarding the creation of disaster resilience, well, the nation is divided, whether an office exclusively for disaster risk would be created, because the approach is multi-office in the resolution and the mitigation, but we wanted one office to do all these things. Well, maybe for an experiment we can try, but again, the country, some experts on the field are divided. For UP Resilience Institute, we are supporting the creation of DRR, of course, that office rather, but I have reservation when it comes to the filling up of items, because again, this is very sad for our country. We have yet to change our behavior, especially politically. That's all.
Thank you so much, Professor Mangada. All right. Can you also answer the question, Ms. Redison?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I would like to answer the question on how receptive are local governments in Aklan, but I can only speak for the municipality of Ibahay, because we are engaging with the LGU. I am from Ibahay. I'm an Ibayhanon, and during the lockdown, I was in Ibahay, and we realized that there is a need for the academe to take the role, to take a proactive role in this information dissemination campaign. While I am not saying that we are experts in translations, but at least at some point we have the knowledge that if people are or understood the situation, they would act rationally. We could minimize fake news. These are like very simple actions, but these are necessary to have an effective information dissemination and COVID-19 response. So my focus here in this presentation is look at local language. I am not covering everything, but the translations of COVID-19 related information help in the programs of the LGU, because they tend to shift to the usage of local languages in their program. So very notable, like how we use the term ayuda for relief operations, we campaign for donation drive. So we use the term Ibayanihan with the term of Ibahay and Bayanihan, Libot Ibahay, or like mobile markets. That's one thing that the communities, I think, also appreciated. So when we talk about engaging with communities, with our LGUs, I know we want to create great impact, but what I think in my experience, in the experience of UP Ibayhanon, we're only actually 8 in this in UP Ibayhanon, and most of these members of the UP Ibayhanon are very young. They are in their 20s, and many are students. I think almost half are students. I think 3 are students and 5 are alumni, and we have our own jobs also while also working with the LGU. So what we want probably to share is that we don't need to look at bigger things. We could probably start with small things in our community, and how can we best use our skills, our knowledge, and use that as an instrument to help the LGU. So I think that's the most important part. We can think big, but we could start small, and from those small initiatives, it could actually radiate to better initiatives. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Professor Francis. Okay, now would you like to answer also the question, Miss Audrey?
Okay, Athena will answer that question.
Okay.
The question from Bibi Maki.
Okay, so about the digital shift of museums. So
Okay.
yeah, it's really it really will not replace the experience of being inside the museum. So, but because of the restrictions and this pandemic, so we have to do it. But the good thing there is, even in their homes, they could still experience a bit, feel a bit of the museum, and they could still see what we have in our collections. And the good thing also is they can comment, and we can see their comments and engage with the audience real time.
All right. Thank you so much, Miss Vitor. Okay, we have a question, another question also for the National Museum Bohol. Good day. Since the National Museum Bohol started its online museum via Facebook, is it a plan to move it the next step, like YouTube, like doing short documentaries? Do you have plan, like using YouTube for presenting the artifacts in the
Yes.
museum?
When we turn to social media, we use the Facebook mainly, but we also have Instagram and Twitter. In fact, the National Museum of the Philippines has a main Facebook page, and there is also a YouTube account, and we just upload our videos there too. So yeah, of course, there is a plan to do short documentaries, as that's also part of our future plans in doing research, especially that we want to also focus on intangible heritage in Bohol.
All right. Thank you so much, Miss Audrey. Okay. I would also like to request Dr. Guitarro, if you want to answer the first question earlier regarding the efforts of the local government units, you can also refer to the question raised by Bibi Manki in the chat window.
Yes, ma'am. As to the first question, I think there are proponents of having a separate department for our disaster risk management, something like that. And of course, in the academy, we are not private. When sooner or later, we'll be involved. As far as the academy is concerned, we have our, like for example, in Haro National High School, or we have the Office of the Disaster Risk Management Council in the school level. And then the basic research of the DepEd, and even in the Commission on Higher Education, where I am right now, are encouraging us to start to conduct research in relation to disaster risk. And I believe that since the Philippines, no doubt, is a disaster-prone area, I believe that it would be, I am for, it would be advisable, no, to have a separate department for that. Could you imagine how devastation of the latest typhoon? As to the comment of Baby Mangkol in the chat box, well, like any other cities, Iloilo is not really, we can say that, at par with Cebu or Baguio or other provinces. But as far as my presentation is concerned, I think what is a good or best practice that we have here is the bayanihan. This is also done in different parts of the country. And maybe the most important factor that Iloilo City differs from other provinces is the heart of our leaders, that they really put into their heart and their mind as far as their job specification is concerned. We have seen our leaders through hard times, crying, and we as citizens of this city is very proud of that leadership. As to the legalities, our mayor is also a lawyer, so all the actions that were in place during the COVID-19 pandemic were clothed with legalities, and that is, I think, one of the best practice that we have. We have a very good leader as far as coordinating, as far as implementing, and mitigating COVID-19. But we cannot deny also the fact that we have also some gray areas, no? As any other, even America, right? So I think what is important is that we have good leaders who are standing by the people. I think that is my answer for the second question, ma'am. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sir Gitaro. Okay, we have another question for Ms. Frances. Thanks po, Ms. Frances. Also, good effort in the translation, such as the essential part of the effective communication. Okay, this is actually a comment from Ivan K. I saw the question regarding radio, the use of radio. Just here. Okay, for Professor Redison, why does it seem that information initiatives in Baha'i ignore the use of radio as a medium of communication?
Okay, thank you for that question. One, we don't have a local radio in Ibahay. Well, there's actually one, but it's not functioning anymore. And we are only 8 in UP Ibayhanon, and this is volunteer work. Most of us are students, graduate students taking up law. Some are even undergraduate students. So even until now, while the pandemic is ongoing, we have our online classes. I teach online classes. We still keep on working with the LGU. So we only focused on platforms that we are well versed and we think we are efficient. And I think radio is also a good medium for us to spread relevant COVID-19 information, but it is not feasible for Ibahay. So what we did was the audio recordings that we had with the mayor, we gave copies, individual copies to the barangay officials, to the barangay captain. So Ibahay also has a lot of far-flung areas, like you would need to walk 5 hours to reach the farthest barrio. So what we did is that we gave them copies of this new normal protocols information campaign, so they could actually play it in their plaza, or like they could put it in some of them, they already have Bluetooth speakers. So these are some of the initiatives that we thought of that could be effective, and we just focused with the platforms that we are familiar. And I think it was also good, or it was also one of the strengths of the information board, is to have very good layout artists, because translations, this will not be as effective if it's not visually presentable. And what we did was, as a team, we talked about making this information materials to be creative. At the same time, it will catch attention, and to use one color, so that every time they see posts about COVID-19, they will always relate that with LGU information board. And then so that, kasi most of the COVID-19 related posts that we see in social media and other platforms, siguro, is that they have different colors. It's so simple, no? It's very simple, it's pragmatic, but I think that's also one thing that we highlighted, to just use like color green or yellow. We mix them up. So if you check our Facebook page, I encourage you to check our Facebook page. You could see what we did there to make this. Kasi for example, if you have laws, or like you have ordinances, it's so boring, right? But if you put pictures, visual representations, it would actually encourage your viewers to actually see and read it. And most of the ordinances and the national laws that were passed during this COVID-19, they're very long. So what we did is we summarized, we just took the salient points, and that's what we translated. And we also attached the original document. So in that way, we know that we have a very short time span, especially in social media. So we use that as a technique to not only present the COVID-19 response, but to actually educate our people of these national laws, of these new ordinances. So we only focus with the platforms that we are most comfortable of. But of course, having radio is also a good opportunity to inform the public. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Francis. Okay, and we have a question from Attorney Sigfrid Diaz. It is for the National Museum Bohol. The old National Museum had a diorama of the Lamanok and the rock art. I have not been to the new National Museum. Is there still a diorama of the Lamanok and the rock art? Is there any 3D scanning or plan to be done on this in order to produce a more accurate model? A 3D scan will not only help preserve the site, it will also help give access to researchers, and it will give more accurate representation, replacing the old diorama that will make a great centerpiece in the new National Museum. The diorama of the Lamanok and the rock.
Yeah. So yeah, it was in the old that was in the old gallery. So we transferred already to the old Capitol, and we have not opened yet our archaeological exhibition. There was a plan to push with the ethnographic and archaeological exhibitions either late this year, karon na tato, or next year. But because of this pandemic, everything was put on hold. So that will be up to the curatorial team if they would be if that diorama would be re-exhibited. So
So do you have, Miss Audrey, do you have planned out to have like a 3D scanning for the diorama?
We don't have plans yet because we don't have the exhibition yet. It's supposed to be discussed by our curatorial team. So we're not there yet. Soon, maybe next year. I don't know yet the plans for the 3D scanning. But since Lamanok Island has been declared by the National Museum as an ICP, so there will be additional research to be done in the area and perhaps would be part of the exhibition. That's all.
All right, thank you, Miss Audrey. Right, I'm going to read some comments here. Miss Athena, can't wait, Museo Davao is closed, as well as Davao Museum. Looking forward, salamat. Thank you very much for the clarification, Professor Redison. From Romeo Taring, I completely agree that generating simple infographics effectively boosts the clarity of information. Kudos to Dr. Francis. All right, I think we covered all the questions already, directed to all the presenters. Okay, so we have 4 presenters for this session. The first presenter is Professor Lidilyn Mangada about the COVID-19 health emergency experience of Super Typhoon Haiyan resettlement, and she talked about the economic challenges encountered by those people who were relocated in the outskirts of the city with limited access to health services, livelihoods, transportation, and it was actually exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And also Professor Francis Anthea Redison presented about why translations matter, the COVID-19 response of Ibahay Aklan. And she talked about the efforts of the LGU in Ibahay Aklan in translating medical terminologies, online information campaign, and government advisories about COVID-19, even the local laws and ordinances about COVID in relation to COVID-19 in local language using multimedia platforms like Facebook, printed materials, and audiovisual recordings, announcements, were made available for the public through the LGU Bahay Information Board, ensuring the reliability of information that the public gets. Okay, and also Iloilo City, Dr. Romeo Ditaro presented the efforts of Iloilo City in fighting against COVID-19 pandemic. And we also have the presentation from the National Museum Bohol team regarding crisis opportunity, the National Museum Bohol amidst COVID-19 pandemic. And they presented about how the National Museum Bohol responded to the pandemic in fulfillment of its mandate in the preservation, conservation, and promotion of natural and cultural heritage. Even despite the physical limitation, they're able to come up with creative opportunities, especially in engaging the community in the delivery of its museum programs. Thank you so much for all the presenters, and please stay online for the next panel session. Good morning, everyone. Maupay nga aga. Maayong buntag sa tanan.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the next session, Session D, the theme Stories, Narratives, and Responses to Colonization. Now, I will be your moderator for this session. I am Jamal Santos Obamalin, and I'm currently taking up my graduate studies in MA Anthropology in the University of San Carlos. So this morning, ladies and gentlemen, we will be having 3 presentations. So before we would proceed to the first presentation, just quick reminders pertaining to decorum and procedures for our session. So for non-presenters, or for those presenters who are not yet to present, we would gladly ask you to please turn your videos off and please mute your audio. And for those, our audience who would wish to ask questions, you are given a period after all the presentations during the open forum, and make certain to include your name, your affiliation, and indicate to whom your question is for. You may do this through the Zoom chat box and as well as through the comment section of Facebook Live. Right, so ladies and gentlemen, without much further ado, let us go to our first presentation. So our first paper presentation is entitled The Philippines in the Story of Southeast Asia, Pre-Colonial, Colonial, and Post-Colonial. Our presenter is an associate professor in the Department of Sociology at the National University of Singapore. Before joining NUS, he completed a PhD in sociocultural anthropology at the University of Washington and was a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Southeast Asian Studies at the University of California, Los Angeles. He teaches anthropology, gender studies, urban studies, and research methods. His research spans field sites across Southeast Asia, particularly Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand. His research interests include transnational networking, urbanism, agrarian transitions, and ASEAN regionalism. His work has appeared in the journals American Ethnologist, Urban Studies, Political Geography, Asian Studies Review, Contemporary Sociology, and Contemporary Southeast Asian Studies, among others. Ladies and gentlemen, from the National University of Singapore, let us welcome Professor Eric C. Thompson.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And oops, make sure this is on. Okay. First of all, let me do a check. Are you hearing me okay?
Yes, Professor, we can hear you clearly.
Excellent. Okay. And then let me try to I'm going to try to share my screen here so that I can show you the slides for the presentation. Hoping this will all work. All right. Okay, great. So are those slides also showing up?
Yes, Professor, it's showing on our end. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, so, oops, I need to get on the right slide though. Just a second. All right. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present at the UGAT conference. The presentation I'm going to do today, I've changed the title slightly, is about the Philippines in and from a Southeast Asian perspective. And what I'm doing in this presentation, this is actually based on a book manuscript that I've been working on for a while. It's a book manuscript that's under preparation. Basically completed about the first 5 chapters out of 8, and the other 3 are still in process. The objective of the book is to be an introduction to Southeast Asia, and it's set within a historical anthropological narrative. And so in this narrative, it's organized both historically and thematically. The objective of the book, the target audience of the book, and what I hope that it'll be valuable for, is particularly for sort of aimed at an undergraduate level courses about Southeast Asia, and also possibly there are now a lot of what are called sort of ASEAN studies courses, to kind of give a fairly clean, a relatively short and straightforward, comprehensible narrative about Southeast Asia from a regional perspective. What I want to do in the present, first of all, to give the narrative structure of the book, I've divided it sort of into 2 parts. The first part is completed, and the second part is about halfway done. In the first part, looks at the themes of, first of all, sort of demography and the populating of Southeast Asia. The second theme is then on trade and how the development of trade shaped the region. The third chapter is really on the rise of early states in Southeast Asia, particularly in the era of the Sanskrit cosmopolis. Chapter 4 then looks at a period of religious reformation, particularly around the introduction of Theravada Buddhism and Islam into Southeast Asia, but also this relates to the expansion of Neo-Confucianism in Vietnam, and then the introduction of Christian and Catholic faiths, particularly, of course, in the Philippines, but also elsewhere in Southeast Asia. Then the second part, or the 5th chapter, then looks at issues around gender and kinship in Southeast Asia, particularly around the ways in which the status of women and gender pluralism shifted from the early modern period around 1400 to the present. Then chapter 6, I turn to emergent identities, particularly sort of the development of senses of ethnic identity, which is really a kind of modern construct that emerges in tandem with a period of Western colonialism. Then chapters 7 and 8 turn to the period of sort of the period of what we often call high colonialism, and when you have a real loss of sovereignty across the region, but also then a regaining of sovereignty from the late 19th century and into the 20th century. And then finally in chapter 8, I look at a chapter I call New Pluralisms. It's really looking at the contemporary era from, say, around 1950 up until the present. And the ways and then sort of trying to wrap up and say the ways in which all of these things of like population, trade, the rise of states, religious reformation, reformations of gender and kinship, senses of identity, and then the sort of development of the nation and ideas of citizenship have all sort of shaped Southeast Asia as a region. So in this particular presentation, what I want to do here, and I really value this opportunity to present this here to the UGAT audience, because in general, one of the things that I'm trying to do with this particular book and the particular narrative perspective is to kind of maintain a regional frame of reference, a Southeast Asian regional frame of reference throughout the entire narrative. There's several things that I'm doing and reasons for writing this particular book. I mean, it's not hard at all to go to bookstores and find, there have been many books written on Southeast Asia, how histories of Southeast Asia and forth. But there are several things that I think are lacking in those. One of the things is that if you look at those narratives, often there's a kind of very strong regional perspective up until about the period of European colonialism. But then really you get a shift to a narrative which really, in my view, overly focuses on a kind of European colonial perspective, and everything gets divided up into the European colonial domains. And then after that, the narrative often is really framed in terms of a national narrative. So instead of, it's sort of, you get a dissolution of a regional perspective, and the later chapters of these books end up being, one chapter, like a section about the Philippines, a section about Thailand, a section about Indonesia, and it kind of loses the Southeast Asian perspective. So while I have this strong Southeast Asian perspective, what I want to do here is what I've done is to sort of take what I've written and also the outlines of the chapters that I'm still working on and kind of look through them and think about how does the Philippines fit into this narrative? Because the Philippines, every nation in Southeast Asia, every part of Southeast Asia has its own obvious particularities. The thing about the Philippines in particular is there are sort of moments at which the Philippines or the Philippine archipelago is very central to the kind of narrative perspective that I developed, but then other points at which the archipelago becomes somewhat marginal to that narrative. And I'm kind of, this is a sort of self-critique. It's also what I would really value from the audience here is if you, is your comments, your critiques and so forth, and particularly anything that sort of fits into any of the, say, chapters that I have, where you think there's sort of important things from a sort of Philippines perspective that either haven't been dealt with, or that, or maybe that there's evidence about it, evidence for it, say from archaeology and other fields, that you think would be particularly important to include, and that perhaps I haven't included in at this point. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to move through the 8 chapters of the book. I'll have do it fairly quickly because of time and so forth, but kind of point out the major places, like, in relationship to how the Philippines is and the Philippine archipelago fits into this narrative. So the first chapter, I basically start somewhere around 30,000 years ago, and this is in the era and the time known as, or the place that's often called Sundaland. And so this is a period when much more of the landmass of Southeast Asia was exposed, and like what we now think of as the Indonesian archipelago was really just the coast of a larger landmass called Sundaland. And then with regard to the Philippines, I believe the evidence is that like the island of Palawan was connected to the mainland. The rest of the area was still archipelagic, but the distances to the archipelago were less. And during this period is when you get the first human habitation of Southeast Asia. You get small foraging bands moving around Southeast Asia, living in Southeast Asia, and that includes into the Philippines in this period. The second major period of sort of like the populating of the region and where the Philippines plays an obvious and very important part is in what's often called the out of Taiwan hypothesis about the Malayo-Polynesian expansion, which of course begins with a movement of peoples and ideas and languages and cultures, and also crucially agriculture, which has been traced as moving sort of from Taiwan down into northern Luzon, and then through the Philippine archipelago, and then branching out and spreading out into the largest actual human migration, or at least the largest expansion of any language family prior to the expansion of European languages in the more global era, because you have expansion all the way out into the Pacific to places like the Hawaiian Islands, and then as far as the coast of Africa and places like Madagascar. So this is where, so the Philippines is sort of a crucial part of this whole sort of Southeast Asian perspective at this point in the narrative. Similarly, the next narrative, which I call the hub of the world, really focuses on trade and the way that the development and expansion of trade networks sort of integrate the region within the region, and then also make a crucial contribution expansion of what is thought of as kind of global trade, or at least the known world of global trade, so to speak, at the time, which is sort of this long distance trade networks which stretch basically from China to at one end to Rome at the other. So during this period, of course, the sort of ships and the sailing expertise of the sort of Malayo-Polynesian natives of the Philippine archipelago and of course the Indonesian archipelago are really absolutely crucial to this period, especially where the evidence seems to show that there's a real robust development of intra-Southeast Asian trade networks that are really crucial and important. And at a later point, when you start to get trade with China and South Asia and the Arab archipelago, really the expansion of those trade works is really crucially shaped by the already existing intra-Southeast Asian trade networks, as well as the sailing technology, which a lot of other cultures, Chinese and others, really learned from Southeast Asian and particularly sort of Malayan populations. But what sort of when the next moment of the narrative though moves to this sort of famous period, which is often thought of sort of as the classical period of Southeast Asia, which is a period that's been termed the period of the Sanskrit cosmopolis. This is a period where you have a large cultural region, which is to a sense sort of interrelated and integrated based on the expansion of Sanskrit and Sanskrit-based ideas. And this is where you get the rise of the classical Southeast Asian states, such as the Khmer Empire that's based at Angkor Wat. And you have the introduction of ideas of statecraft, really. One of these is the Arthasastra, which is a particular manual about basically how to organize a classic mandala kingdom. You also have ideas like, especially in northern Vietnam, coming from the Chinese ideas about how to organize a Chinese imperial state. And so these ideas of statecraft are coming into and being absorbed and adopted and so forth by Southeast Asian populations. You get the expansion of political economic hierarchies. But there's fairly scant evidence of this influence in the Philippines or in the Philippine archipelago. There's a little bit, but it's very scant. And so but during this period, there is evidence of the evolution of sort of barangay-based chiefdoms. There is a sort of political development going on, but it's kind of outside of this main influence when you look at a narrative in this Southeast Asian context. The next point, the next sort of framework or period that I focus on is what I call a period of religious reformation and the influence of sort of power pieting reformation. What's really crucial here is that you get a shift from, on the one hand, you have in Southeast Asia prior to this period, you have the elite sort of Brahmin Buddhist ideas of the Sanskrit cosmopolis, but those are really very exclusively elite religions. And then you have a lot of like local religious practices. But this is the period when you really get the influence of popular religions. And there's an important parallel expansion to the expansion of Theravada Buddhism on the one hand and Islam on the other. But then you also get Neo-Confucianism in Vietnam. And then a little bit later, but having many of the same effects, is the influence of Christianity in the Philippines and in a variety of other places in Southeast Asia. The crucial thing here is that you have a shift from these kind of elite religions to popular religions, and that really changes a lot in terms of the societies and cultures of Southeast Asia. Right. I move from that then to start talking in the next two chapters, look first at gender and kinship, and then secondly at sort of ethnic identities. And so with regard to genders and kinship, I sort of anchor this in this period of what's sometimes called early modern Southeast Asia, starting a little bit before the introduction of European colonialism and moving, sort of into that period. And if you look at Southeast Asia, one of the things that's classically said about the region is that there's been traditionally a fairly high, relatively high status of women within the region, that it historically and even today, and also that it's been a region that, again, relative to many other regions, has had a fairly large, high acceptance or tolerance of gender pluralism. This is sort of third genders, what we think of as transgender today. But it's during this period of the early modern, particularly with the influence of basically these popular religions, but are coming out of very patriarchal cultures. Islam, Christianity, Neo-Confucianism, and Theravada Buddhism are all like religions that have a lot of sort of patriarchal theology within them. But there's also the influence, increasing influence of obviously Europeans over this period, but also Chinese and others who are sort of lots of foreign influences who are primarily men coming to Southeast Asia and really favoring male leaders over various traditional female forms of authority, sort of such as feminine ritual specialists. And specifically in the Philippines, prior to the introduction of Spanish Catholicism, you had very prominent feminine ritual specialists. Now, these feminine ritual specialists, some of them were, biologically female-bodied individuals, but there's also male-bodied individuals, but they perform sort of in a gendered feminine ways. Now, what happens during this period is that you get this overall throughout Southeast Asia kind of decline, both in the status of women and in terms of gender pluralism, or the tolerance and acceptance of gender pluralism. And again, this is sort of a period where I would say that the Philippine archipelago starts to become more reintegrated with the primary sort of narrative of Southeast Asia, at least as I'm presenting it in this particular framework. Okay, now I'll move through the rest of these fairly quickly here, sorry, because of the time. But the next chapter then looks at the sort of emergence of modern senses of ethnicity and race. Now, the way, nowadays we really often think very strongly in terms of, people having these ethnic identities or racial identities, but in a certain way, that's a very modern phenomenon, very influenced by European thought and other factors. What's kind of interesting about the Philippines is that, ethnic identities become incredibly hegemonic in Malaysia, Indonesia, and many other places in Southeast Asia. But interestingly, I think in the Philippines, in my reading of it, is that you really get other sorts of identities, regional identities between sort of, Visayas, Luzon, and Mindanao as kind of regional identities, and also those map onto somewhat to religious identities of Catholic and Muslim identities. You also get a development of, class-based identities with sort of the notion of the Principalia. You get the notion of the Indios, and there's a certain way that evolves into a sort of Filipino identity. And you also get this concept, in the Philippines, which I think has been talked about at this conference, and even in the last session, of this idea of the indigenous, right? The indigenous, which is, all of these things map onto identities and relationships that stretch way back before colonialism, but they get reconfigured and developed in a particular modern way during this period. Okay, the next couple of chapters, or the last couple of chapters, I look at the period of of sovereignty being lost and regained. What's here is, again, the Philippines has a very similar experience to the rest of Southeast Asia, in that you have, of course, famously Rizal, the Ilustrados, the Kapituan, and so forth. And these very much parallel, those sorts of experiences parallel, people people and groups like Sukarno in Indonesia, Aung San in Myanmar, Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, also the reformist Thai monarchy, and to some extent a modernized Brunei Sultanate. One way I've been thinking about this is there's a famous quote from Audre Lorde about how you cannot dismantle the master's house using the master's tools, but that's not at all what happens in Southeast Asia. Really, people throughout Southeast Asia basically learned the master's tools in order to claim, to take over, and then to renovate and refashion the master's house in a sort of image of Southeast Asia and the forging of new nations and nation states across Southeast Asia. Then the final sort of chapter of the book simply looks at what I call new pluralisms. And this is sort of then looking at the ways in which, with all of their diversity, important diversity at the same time, there's a sort of similarity to Southeast Asian stories across the region, in that the entire region is one where people are living in a state of post-colonial nationalism, which has certain challenges and opportunities in terms of diversity. I mean, obviously, challenges are ones of, incredible income inequality in a kind of neoliberal globalized world, but also, of sort of the balance and the competition between, say, national and minority languages and identities, and also religious diversity and identities. And also thinking in terms specifically of sort of the concept of ASEAN regionalism and the ways in which one of the things I'm trying to write about in this, or write against in this particular narrative, in this case, is that a lot of time ASEAN regionalism is seen as is constantly compared to European regionalism, and seen as, sort of somehow lesser than European EU kind of regionalism. But what I would argue is that EU regionalism is really conceptualized as the nation state writ large, whereas for me, I would argue that ASEAN regionalism is a different kind of nationalism, and it's really the plural society writ large. It's a different kind of nationalism, and it's people's political leaders and others within Southeast Asia really trying to forge a distinctive and distinctively sort of Southeast Asian sense of regionalism. Okay, I know I think I'm sort of going a little long on the time here, so trying to cover 30,000 years. But so the overall point here is that I think that it's interesting to look at, or what I see in sort of critiquing, looking at my own work, is the way that the Philippine archipelago is sort of very central and integrated into the Southeast Asian framework and story at various times, especially early on with the Malayo-Polynesian expansion and other things going on. It becomes sort of marginal to that at this period of Sanskrit cosmopolis, and I think it's because of this that sometimes the Philippines is seen as not quite as much, say, part of Southeast Asia as some other places like, say, Thailand or perhaps Indonesia or something. But if you look at the dynamics that create the region as it is, from about 1400 onward, the Philippine archipelago is very much more integrated into the story and really has many of the same sorts of parallel experiences, of course, with Catholicism as opposed to Theravada, or with Rizal's experience versus Sukarno's. But there's really strong parallels that create a sort of shared experience across the region, and in some ways do shape the region as a region. All right, I'll end there. Thank you very much for your time, and I very much look forward to your comments, your questions, and your feedback. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Thompson, for your presentation. I believe there was a revision, right, on the title. So the title now, the revised title is The Philippines in and From a Southeast Asian Perspective. So Professor Thompson presented to us the role, the presence, and the absence of the Philippine archipelago and its influence to the Southeast Asian narrative, and how the pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial eras were able to put into an effect or an influence into the dynamics of the Philippine archipelago, and as well as to its surrounding nations and surrounding countries or cultural groups. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Eric C. Thompson. Thank you, Professor. So gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, on the without much further ado, we shall proceed to the next presentation entitled Geomapping of Visayan Ethnographies of the Otley Bayer Collection in the Philippine National Library. So our presenter for this paper is a graduate of AB, finished his AB Philosophy at San Carlos Seminary College and his MA in Anthropology at the University of San Carlos. He is currently working as a full-time instructor of social sciences at the Department of Liberal Arts and Behavioral Sciences at the Visayas State University. On behalf of his colleagues, namely Leslie Ann L. Liwanag, Mary Grace P. Inaya, Precious Elaine D. Tubigan, Hilda A. Pedrera, and Daniel Joseph Titan. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome our next presenter from the Visayas State University, Mr. Romeo J. Turing Jr. Sir.
Right, thank you for that introduction, Jamal. Let me share my screen. Okay, kita. Can you see my screen now already?
I think it's still loading pa.
Okay, please let me know. Oh. Alright, makita na ba?
Okay, makita na.
Okay, thank you. All right, good morning, everyone.
Slideshow.
Yes. Okay. All right, research is entitled The Geomapping of Visayan Ethnographies of the Henry Otley Bayer Collection that's found in the Philippine National Library. As an introduction, for those who are not familiar who is Otley Bayer, he is actually one of the first anthropologists that came to the Philippines. He's actually regarded as the father of Philippine anthropology. And he has a lot of collections now found in the Philippine National Library. What I'm talking about is the online collection, which you will know later on. And when we say it's Otley Bayer collection, it's not only Otley Bayer writing all this literature, but all of his students, colleagues, teachers in the University of the Philippines at that time were part of this collection. Even prominent people and politicians also contributed to the collection. For this particular presentation, I'm going to present these objectives. First, we mapped all of these literatures to shed light on the development of anthropology during the insular government. So these are literatures around 100 years old already, from the start of the American occupation of our archipelago. And then we also, through mapping all of these literatures, we're able to expose the gaps manifested by the communities not covered by the collection. And also we need to see a glimpse of American colonial influence, and that ensues when conducting social science researches such as this. And then it's only through a map that we can build a concise compilation of historical and cultural data in geographical representation. You will know later on how our research team were able to address all these objectives. Beforehand, I need to also introduce the composition of our summer Lady team. With me is Dr. Lian Liwanag from the Salle University. She has a background of Philippine Studies. And also Ms. Grace Inaya. She has a background of literature coming from Cebu Normal University. We're also colleagues in PSU. And also Precious Tubigan, currently studying in CNU and also in literature. And yours truly. And Ms. Hilda Pridera has a background in education, major in Filipino, and Janiel Joseph Tan, a background on English literature. I'm showing you this in order to give you an idea that our team is, the composition of our team is is multilinguistic, is interdisciplinary and ethnically diverse. And through this composition, we have found out different insights, which hopefully you can see later on. And regarding with the methodology, this is what I'm talking about when I say Philippine National Library. There's an online gallery of all this collection of Otley Bayer. It's uploaded online. You can actually access it. And then we just filter them out of all the readings in the Visayas. When we say it's reading and available, please don't have high expectations, because it's really challenging to read all of these things, sometimes you can gain some superhuman abilities to actually read. And there's your reading comprehension, it should be tested by these readings. And these are all in JPEG files. So if you're interested to go to the online collection, please prepare high accessibility to the internet because we're gonna be loading. So what our research team is doing is that we have this, we just call it Bayanihang Pagbabasa. So like in every week since the start of the pandemic, we read around 2 to 3 articles based on the collection. And then after reading all of this, we summarize it, and then we meet once a week and then report what we have read. And since we are 6 of us, it's as if every week we have already read around 20 articles or 18 to 20 articles, depending on the length of the paper. And the original point of actually doing this is purely archival, because we want to highlight the discourses that happen in the areas that are part of the collection. Then I notice a pattern whenever we go on reporting, that there are places keep on repeating, mentioned about this, and then a certain ethnographer goes to this place. Then I thought, how about we make a map of all of these things, and probably we can find out something. And this is the meat of our presentation today. The presentation outline, there's not much text. Hopefully expect there's a lot, all of the next slides are all maps. So you can only enjoy the presentations when you are on the screen. So first, I'll be talking about the general map, and then zoom in out into different provincial maps, and Panay and Guimaras, and then Negros, Johor, Cebu, Bohol, Naitay-po diri, and then Leyte, Samar, and then we go back to the general map for some general notes, and then conclusions and recommendations. And it's basically covering the entirety of the Visayas, and I hopefully you find this interesting. Okay, now for the general map of the Visayas. I hope you take notice of the legend. I'm only wanna see you two basic dimensions we're going to show. The red spots are the places mentioned in the ethnographic accounts. Whenever they go there and then they write about the culture of the community, there will be a map. Whenever there's a certain legend, like a legend of a certain lake or a river or a mountain, we also put it there. Or whenever the trail of the ethnographers, whenever we went to this terminal and we stayed there for 3 days, and then we went to this place. So na siya sa mapa tanan. We put it there just for us to imagine what really happened on the bigger. If we have an eye from the above, what happened to the ethnographers under Otley Bayer. So also please pay also attention with the shading. This is a number of articles written about this place. When they say it's one, like Siquijor and Guimaras, for example, of all the more than 1,000 articles that we've scanned, there's only one talking about Siquijor, and only one also talking about Guimaras. And this is something interesting for you to know. As you can see, most of the articles, like 58 of them out of these several documents, although we're not yet finished scanning all of them, there are 58 so far that most of them are in Iloilo, and then in Negros, and then the rest you can actually interpret but based on how we color the maps. Now we go particular in every provincial island groups here. First, we talk about Panay. By the way, if you notice na ay mga repetitive labels, it means to say that there are a lot of literatures going there. Because the way I catalog each and every literature, one literature there, one spot is equivalent to one paper, one manuscript. And every time I put it there, it's still under one shapefile. Maybe later on, if I'm going to refine it, you can see a different picture, but I hope you understand why there are repeating labels like this. But this is Panay. Also, please take note that Aklan during the insular government was still part of Capiz. That's why they share the same number of literatures in this time. And as you can see, Antique has the least number of literatures written in the collection, only about places as San Jose, then Sibalom, and then San Remigio. And we have also paid close up attention with in the metropolitan area of present-day Iloilo City. When during this time, the districts like Haro, La Paz, Molo, Lapus, these are present-day districts of Iloilo, but before they were classified as individual towns. And this is also something that we found out in the Otley Bayer collection. And the ethnographers are very keen to these details, as you can see. And yeah, we also retain the old names like Capiz, for example. This is present-day Roja City, or Nagaba. This is present-day Jordan in Guimaras, or Jordan. I don't know how they call it. And yeah, this is, as you can see, this is where the ethnographers at those time, the Otley Bayer came in Panay Island. And most of the collection in the Visayas are actually concentrated in this area. Now, from Panay, let's go east to Negros. There's really a clear dichotomy during this time about Negros Occidental and Negros Oriental. As you can see, there's a lot of things happening here in this side, especially in the Ilonggo regions of near Bacolod, Talisay, and then here. And you can really see a pattern. These are places where the sugar cane plantations proliferate during the insular government. And if you can really think about it logically, one possible interpretation is that there's a lot of collection in these areas, because if you can send your kid to Manila to study in UP in the time of the insular government, it means to say that you came from a very prominent family, like a political clan or a son of a haciendero. And take note that these places now that has massive collections of Otley Bayer, most of them became cities, present-day cities in Negros. And it also it reflects the same demographic distribution in present day. Like in Negros Oriental, much of the activities came from Dumaguete and then Bais, and then surprisingly Ginhugan. I've never been there, but yeah, it's also mentioned. And then yeah, I think you can interpret further. And Siquijor, there's only one mention, and it's obviously it's about the tradition on witchcraft and barang-barang thing and going on. It's the same thing with Panay. I forgot to mention. There's a lot of things about aswang mentioned in the Panay collections, and it's really interesting to revisit all of this literature. From Negros, let's go west again to Cebu and Bohol. As you can, interestingly, all that time as a Cebuano, I really thought that we are some kind of powerhouse in the Visayas, but it turns out Region 6 has more literatures in the Otley Bayer collection compared to Cebu. And it's just that the Kagishagkaan, there's a lot of spots here. It's primarily because of the contribution of Junicio Hacosalem. Junicio Hacosalem wrote a 13-page paper describing the etymology of the names of every town. And we have no idea which town in Cebu already existed during the American period, and which town now are actually new, like Tabuelan was not mentioned here, or Santander is not part of the collection. And before Mactan, and then Lapu-Lapu City, where I live, is actually called Upon before, and there's a lot of things going on there. And I want you to know that the spot map is not old. There's a huge possibility that in every literature, they mention a lot of places, and that is what happened in Cebu. In a single paper, there's a lot of places mentioned. And I just cannot put it in a map because we want to establish a database for interested researchers who would like to know what did Otley Bayer, the students of Otley Bayer know about this place. Is there something? Just look at the map. And this is actually one of the purpose why we're cataloging all of these things. And also in Bohol, much of the places mentioned are actually part of the weaving industry or other economic activities, and also archaeological sites. I hope the one in the National Museum would be interested to look at this map, because there's a lot of caves here mentioned also. And yeah, from Cebu and Bohol, let's go west to Leyte. Yeah, we classify during the insular government, Biliran and Southern Leyte was one contiguous political area. So it's under one shape file. So they share the same shape. And please be noticed that even at this time, the Camotes Islands are part of Bohol, so do not think of this as part of Leyte. And what's interesting is most of the literatures are concentrated in the Waray region of Leyte. And the Cebuano-speaking regions, here in Sugod, Maasin, Machoron, Hindang, and nothing much told about this. Not even in Baybay, where VSU is now located, not even Ormoc, not even a lot of popular places. And it's giving us a sense of wonder why the ethnographers were not able to visit this place. What could have happened? And this is one interesting thing that we want to point out in geomapping all these literatures, exposing the gaps of knowledge that we want to convey. And lastly, the last close-up would be Samar. We have already exhausted all of the literatures related to Samar. One interesting thing that the map could reveal is that we can reimagine the adventures on the trail of ethnographers where the way they went. Because if you're going to connect the map, this is the trail of Jose Lagrimas, one of the ethnographers contributed in the collection, from Lauang to Katubig. This is actually following the trail of the river, and during this time when infrastructure was not really that much developed compared to today, it's not hard to imagine that the ethnographers navigated the rivers to go to different communities. And this is one interesting thing why we put it here. And also Homonhon and Surang Yuta, not really indicated that they went to the place, but at least they have mentioned legends regarding the heaven on earth things going on. Okay, general notes comparing. In retrospect, we see similar patterns. Like the authors, they're coming from the surnames now are very popular today, like political clans today, like the Turalba of Tagbilaran City, or the Romualdez. Even the grandfather of Imelda Marcos was part of the collection. He contributed something. Judicial Hakosalem, if you're familiar with Hakosalem Street in Cebu City, he was a former governor of Cebu. He also contributed to the collection. And most probably all of these sons of hacienderos and all of these rich and prominent people in the Ilonggo region have also contributed here. And one very interesting in the anthropology of encounters is that their writings are very far from contemporary ethnographic standards because they use verbs like primitive, uncivilized, uneducated, pagan, grotesque, ignorant, especially people drinking tuba, for example. They just describe it as very ignorant. And in today's standard, if an anthropologist would write something that way, that's really a no-no. And this is something interesting to see because it shows an evolution how much we have actually developed our way of political correctness in this field. And also, this is also the time when the West people, especially the anthropologists of the US, you go here to the Philippines or other places for exotic paradise. And we also notice there in the literature of the Otley Bayer collection that they tend to highlight the exotic elements of our culture, like all these shamanic experiences, all of this magic. They try to, foreign authors tend to write more about those elements. And also Filipino authors usually write about their hometown. So that's probably why the distribution of literatures of the Otley Bayer collection looks like this, because most of the people, the students of UP under Otley Bayer, were writing about their hometown. That's why it's like this. And sometimes the patterns are a lot of ways similar. We kind of suspect na medyo na nangupya sa ilaha mga estudyante, but these are possible interpretations. We don't really know. And that's why we always take a grain of salt, because there's a lot of hoax that occurred in the Otley Bayer collection. And I've also consulted Sir Jopper Rosales and then Sir Rolando Brunyaga about the literatures and probably on how we can actually find meaning on all of these things. And yeah, also one interesting thing to remember, as I already pointed out, that there are fewer literature in Cebu compared to Iloilo, is because of the way how the writers in Iloilo divide their topics. Like in Samar and in Leyte, most of them, they try to to write a long paper of all of the topics, like about to 30 pages ang ilang paper. But in Iloilo, writers tend to divide one paper for customs, one paper for religion, one paper for this, and that's why there's a lot of literature in this area. And in conclusion, through mapping out ethnographic accounts, scholars will have a concise database of research-related data, and combining both archival research and GIS mapping shows the distribution of wealth, power, and culture of places. It also reveals the gap of knowledge because we come to wonder why nobody visited this place. Why nobody visited this place? Why is there such a gap? And it opens a lot of portals for scholars to get interested into going into history and anthropology. And this is still an ongoing study. And we are expecting that a lot of places will be part of the map because we just tested the waters lang. We quickly scan everything first to know which direction our research team will go. But hopefully in the future, when we have enough time to read all through it, we can probably have an updated map. And we actually recommend this method for all of other pools of literature for regardless of your research interests. It would be nice that we can put everything on the map because it also addresses the gaps of our knowledge, for instruction or research and extension opportunities for us. So I think that would be all. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward for your questions. Thank you.
Right. So thank you, Mr. Romeo Turing Jr. for your presentation, and truly it was very insightful and at the same time quite intriguing. Having to wonder about the reasons why certain places are not being done. Certain ethnographic studies are not being done in certain places. So nonetheless, ladies and gentlemen, we were able to look into the development of anthropology during the insular government. Exposed some gaps. The presentation was able to expose some gaps, as well as the glimpse of American colonial influence in social science research in the Philippines, and as well as a compilation of cultural data in geographical representation. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, Mr. Romeo J. Turing Jr. From the Visayas State University. So for our third presentation for this session is entitled Guerrilla Responses to the Collaboration Issue in Negros Oriental During the Japanese Occupation. Our speaker for this presentation is an assistant professor from the Social Science Department, College of Arts and Sciences in Negros Oriental State University, Main Campus 1. He finished his master's in history and his PhD in social science at Silliman University. His main discipline is in the field of history, and his research interests include World War II studies, such as resistance and collaboration, and local biographical studies. So ladies and gentlemen, the speaker for this presentation from Negros Oriental State University, Professor Justin Jose A. Bulado. Sir.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, let me just share my screen for a while. Okay. Share. Can you see it?
Yes, Professor. It's showing on our end. Thank you.
Okay, let me just... Okay. So good morning, everyone. I'll be presenting about the guerrilla responses to the collaboration issue in Negros Oriental during the Japanese occupation. Now, the issue of collaboration dates back to the Spanish and American colonial period. The actions of political elites during the Spanish and American period are not dissimilar to what the next generation of political elites did during the Japanese occupation. This was actually the main argument of Senator Claro M. Recto when he was tried in the People's Court for collaborating with the Japanese. He said in his book, 3 Years of Enemy Occupation, he said that what they did was simply the same as what the other political elites did during the Spanish and American period. So this shows that the political elites have invariably shown their willingness to work with an occupying force. So I'll be using the anthropology of encounters as an anthropological lens. And as Edward Viding said, encounters, however uncertain in this time and day, are arenas for making the unpredictable predictable and for seeking mutual interpretations of what others are all about. So when we look at the historical development of the Philippines, we will really see that the political elites have had a very predictable characteristic, and that was how they collaborated. No? They collaborated with the foreign occupants during the Spanish occupation, later on during the American occupation, even with the creation of the Malolos Congress, in which most of them were part of. After that, after they saw that Aguinaldo was failing, or after they saw that the Americans were more powerful and influential compared to the Filipinos, they then shifted sides and went along with the Americans. And later on, during the Japanese occupation, they did the same thing. So collaboration is defined as working jointly or cooperate territoriously with the enemy. There are actually 4 types of collaboration: military, economic, cultural, and political. The focus of this study or of this paper is political collaboration. Now, there are also 2 forms of collaboration that I've defined, that I will define. Active collaboration is typified by extreme loyalty to Japan, or collaborators who have pledged allegiance to Japan, while the passive collaborators were the collaborators who did not pledge allegiance with Japan and only did so for survival. And even some of them decided to work with the guerrilla forces. So these are some examples of cases of the collaborators. Now, the first case is that of Mariano Perdices, the wartime mayor of Dumaguete. Now, Perdices was still a young politician who faced a Herculean task when the Japanese arrived in Dumaguete. He was included in the list of enemy collaborators report by Major Juan Dominado, found in the reports of the 75th Infantry Battalion. So, what were his roles? Now, Perdices still managed to gain the trust of the members of the guerrilla movement. He opted to remain in the occupied area to help, if not become a cushion of the people of Dumaguete. The first thing that he did was to oppose the scorched earth policy of some locals of Dumaguete, because before the Japanese could arrive in Dumaguete, some locals wanted to burn the buildings just so that the Japanese would not be able to make use of it, just like what the Russians did before Napoleon arrived. So the only people to suffer, according to Perdices, from a burning policy would be the Filipinos, in this case, the Dumagueteños. So the scorched earth policy did not push through because of Perdices' decision. So when the Japanese arrived, Perdices was one of the first municipal officials to return to office. He did this thinking that he can save more lives as mayor in the occupied area of Dumaguete. He was in hiding before the Japanese arrived, but then he was called upon by the Japanese to return to the occupied area. And he was met with that dilemma whether he should return or not, but he decided to return because he said he can save more lives if he continued to serve as mayor. The Japanese at the outset did not know that Perdices was in contact with the guerrillas. But in reality, he was constantly in touch with the intelligence officer, Major Juan Dominado. Eventually, Perdices' intent or loyalty was tested when Juan Dominado was asked by Professor Henry Roy Bell, a professor from Silliman University and who became a respected figure in the guerrilla movement, to rescue Lieutenant Louis Vale, a former USAFE soldier who was also a known radio operator. They needed Lieutenant Vale in Malabo, which was the headquarters of the guerrilla movement, because they wanted him to become the radio operator. Dominado eventually was successful in his mission to send Lieutenant Vale to Malabo. However, he received news that his wife was missing after the Japanese forces ransacked their house and interrogated her. The governor of Negros Oriental did not help. The first person that Juan Dominado went to was the governor, Governor Villanueva, but he did not want anything to do with Dominado. Perdices, however, after knowing about Captain Suda, the head of the Japanese forces in Dumaguete, or Negros Oriental, helped hide Dominado's wife. The guerrillas' trust in Perdices was further undergirded when he started to send medicines for Dominado to give to his compatriots in the hinterlands. It was also further strengthened when Perdices helped in the mission of the guerrillas, wherein a certain messenger named Lorenzo Simafranca was asked to get a blueprint of the Dumaguete airfield. So he was the contact person of Lorenzo Simafranca, and he assisted Lorenzo Simafranca in getting a blueprint of the airfield, which later on was sent to MacArthur in Australia, and American forces in Australia. And by September of 1944, they used this blueprint to for the bombing campaign of Dumaguete airfield. With pinpoint accuracy, they were able to bomb the several aircrafts, airplanes uh, of the Japanese, and also some supply depot. The next case is that of Governor Guillermo Villanueva. Now, Villanueva had a very limited role as governor. His main goal was in the pacification campaign, asking people to return to the occupied area. Unlike Perdices, he was abhorred by the guerrillas for some reasons. One was that he was representative of the Kalibapi, which was the sole party of the state during the Japanese occupation. He also took part in the food confiscation in Tanhay, wherein he ordered the Japanese troops together with the Bureau of Constabulary to get food from Tanhay in order to feed the Japanese and the people of Dumaguete. This was met with violent opposition. And also the notice for conscription later on during the penultimate years of the war. This was also met with violent opposition. He almost fell victim to a guerrilla ambush on October 22, 1942. He was wounded and was later on treated by the man here, Dr. Ponce de Leon, in the Mission Hospital. After that, he decided to leave Dumaguete and temporarily stayed in Opon while waiting for the violent guerrilla reprisals to die down. On June 1944, 2 years after, Villanueva wrote a missive to, by the way, Opon is modern-day Lapu-Lapu, in Cebu. So on June 1944, Villanueva wrote a missive to Colonel Absede, asking him to surrender and return to the occupied area. Absede was actually the head of the guerrilla forces in Negros Oriental, the unified guerrilla forces in Negros Oriental. Absede then replied, "My men and I are certainly going down soon, but not to surrender. God willing, all true Filipinos are going down, not to shake hands with the Japanese, but to drive them from our shores." So the guerrillas never had that choice to surrender, or never had that option to surrender. Eventually, when the Japanese were already retreating to the hinterlands of Zamboanguita, it was there wherein Governor Villanueva met his unfortunate fate. He was actually executed by the Japanese days before they surrendered to the American and Filipino forces in Zamboanguita, Negros Oriental. His body has not yet been recovered, and we do not know where his body is right now. And we also do not know why he was killed by the Japanese forces. So he was not killed by the guerrillas, but he was killed by the Japanese forces days before the surrender. The next case is that of Jose Pepe Martinez. He was the former mayor of Dumaguete and the provincial board member of Negros Oriental during the war. He was very active in the pacification campaign, and the guerrillas perceived him as an active collaborator. Representative Jose Romero, who later on became senator, called him a man known for his great courage. To Martinez, he participated in the pacification campaign because he believed he was helping the people through his collaboration with the Japanese forces, just like what Perdices believed in. But unfortunately, the guerrillas did not trust Martinez. Martinez was detested by the guerrillas for taking part in the arrest and execution of Mr. Pio Caballero, the manager of the Philippine National Bank. Martinez also had apprehensions on his collaboration when he told the Bryant family, and I quote, "I am in a very uncomfortable position. The Filipinos consider me a traitor. I suppose the Americans think I am against them, and the Japanese don't trust me." This was the conundrum of the collaborators, because the Filipinos considered them as traitors. The Americans were not for them. They were not supported by the Americans. And the Japanese, even if they were working for them, did not totally trust them. Eventually, Martinez was arrested by the guerrillas in Luzuriaga, now modern-day Valencia, the town of Valencia. And he was arrested and supposed to be brought to Malabo. But then Dr. Jose Garcia, the man in the picture there, had an he had an eyewitness account on the execution of Pepe Martinez. And let me just read this. "My companions and I were looking for a hut to rest and have a place to sleep above Camp Lookout. It was about almost 6 o'clock in the afternoon when we were going up this hill. And on our way, we met Pepe Martinez, accompanied by 10 guerrilla soldiers going down the hill. We recognized each other and we just smiled at each other. He did not talk to me. I think he was confident that nothing would happen to him. In just a short while, we found a small nipa hut in the middle of an abaca plantation, and we thought it was a good place to rest for the night. Just as we sat down on the floor, we heard several shots from below the hill and found out later that Pepe Martinez was shot. Until now, we do not know why the guerrillas shot Pepe Martinez. But I think from the data that I presented, that he was detested and abhorred by the guerrillas, of course, we can probably say that it was out of that detestment that Pepe Martinez was shot. Concluding remarks. Now, I still have other cases, but because of the lack of time, let me just briefly mention this. There were other guerrilla reprisals against minor collaborators, specifically in the month of October 1942. October 1942 was a very bloody month in Negros Oriental. A lot of guerrillas, a lot of collaborators were violently killed, ambushed by the guerrillas. These reprisals, however, stopped when Mayor Perdices advised Juan Dominado to discontinue the said blacklist missions. As Perdices said, this was not the right way to attain justice. Even when the war was almost over, the guerrillas still looked at the collaborators and those living in the occupied areas with contempt. Colonel Absede, the head of the guerrillas, said after the war, "Scorn and treat with contempt all Filipinos who have worked for the enemy as puppets, collaborators, informers. All Filipinos who in one way or another have aided or made it easy for the enemy to continue to stay in our country, but could not be prosecuted on the account of devious legalities. And all Filipinos who stayed in the enemy-occupied areas, their only aim being to join the winner after the struggle." So you can see the polarization here among the guerrillas and the people in the occupied areas. The guerrillas viewed them with scorn and contempt, viewed them with contempt. The view of Absede is actually common among the guerrillas. The case between the guerrillas and the collaborators was that of Filipinos fighting each other due to differing foreign loyalties or involvements. The guerrillas being very loyal to the Americans, while on the other hand, the people in the occupied areas and the collaborators were not really loyal to the Japanese per se, but they were just people trying to survive the war. James A. Villanueva said that the summary justice and sometimes brutal methods of the guerrillas was a dark chapter in the history of the Philippines. So there were two reactions basically: supportive reaction, that of Perdices, and violent, that of Pepe Martinez and towards Governor Villanueva and the other minor collaborators. So the issue of collaboration and resistance should not be typified as black and white. Many of us today would say that the guerrilla members were heroes and then the collaborators were traitors. It's not as simple as that. It's still a gray area, especially on the issue of collaboration. Collaborators, not all of them were traitors. In fact, some of them were even considered as heroes, just like Perdices and the others. So it should not be characterized as a black and white thing. No. The guerrilla should not. So there were even some guerrillas who should not be considered as heroes because of the because some of them were just wild bands and very violent, ransacking and even raping women in the hinterlands. So I think more studies should be done about collaboration, especially in the other provinces. And I hope that this study will provide the foundation of further studies ahead. So that ends my presentation. Thank you for listening, everyone.
Thank you, Professor Bolado, for your presentation on the guerrilla responses to the collaboration issue in Negros Oriental during the Japanese occupation. So it was a very informative research presentation. It allows us to really see the role of collaboration and as well as the dynamism of political collaboration between political elites and occupying forces in the perspective of experiences, dilemmas, issues, conundrums, the polarization and various reactions. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, Professor Justin Jose A. Bolado from Negros Oriental State University. So at this point, ladies and gentlemen, we would be having the open forum. And if I may take the liberty of having to check into the chat box here of possible questions. Let me check. And also for those who are watching us through Facebook Live, you may post your questions through the comment section of in Facebook Live. Let me check here. Okay, so this is coming from BB Monkey. To Professor Eric Thompson, if I may read, I just want to ask about pre-colonial discourse in Southeast Asia. I agree with your view on the regional and European colonial perspective. We usually ascribe our pre-colonial past with the arrival of the conquistadors. We also have an inclination towards the grander narratives like those by Bellwood, Bust, and Solheim. Now that they're bad, but not that they're bad, but sometimes we put the more focused narratives on the sidelines. So, so how do we rethink these perspectives? I mean, the first question was, I just want, so would you have a comment on that, Professor Thompson, pertaining to the comment coming from BB Monkey?
Sure, yeah, thank you. Whoops, sorry, let me get this. There, that should work a little bit better. Okay, yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, I was also looking through the comments in the chat. Thanks to all of you who presented the comments. Maybe I can address these a little bit. Some of the questions together. It was so one is. One question was raised both in this question and one of the other questions was, as another person put it, during the pre-colonial period when there was no Philippines, but only separate autonomous localities, on what narratives are the Philippines based, right? So one of the things I try to do in writing this, of course, is to not call the Philippines, you know, in some sort of pre-colonial period, because there isn't a Philippines, so to speak. I do use the term the Philippine archipelago and the Indonesian archipelago just as a shorthand for, or just more generally the Southeast Asian archipelago for a shorthand for, you know, specifying those areas that are sometimes called maritime or island Southeast Asia. But of course, you know, this is part of what I'm trying to do with this narrative is, of course, the most dominant historical narratives that we have in the world today tend to be nationally framed narratives. And so whether you're in the Philippines or Malaysia or Indonesia or anywhere, one tends to sort of take the contemporarily existing nation state and then project it back into the past and create certain kind of barriers or kind of borders that obviously didn't exist at that time. But what I'm trying to do, especially in this, say, the pre-colonial period, is to think about the various dynamics going on in the region and the ways in which you do get people across the region, not everyone and not in every case, but peoples across the region who sort of experience certain dynamics that create a certain kind of shared historical experience. And so, you know, in the case of the Philippine archipelago, of course, you know, I was talking about how you have these migrations, for example, you know, one is the Sundo land migration, another is the expansion of rice-based cultures. And actually, there's a bigger story in that you basically have you have movements down the mainland on the one hand and down the Philippine archipelago and out into the Indonesian archipelago, both of which take rice-based cultures through, you know, into and throughout Southeast Asia. Another question, if I may, which sort of pertains to a similar thing, I think two different people pointed out the issue of the Muslim sultanates in the Philippines. And of course, those are really important. In fact, I think in the overall narrative, I think I'm going to be ending up kind of talking about those probably the most in the chapter I'm working right now, which is this chapter about the emergence of ethnicity. Because of course, you know, when you talk, and also when I talk about the expansion of religion, of course, when you talk about the expansion of Islam, that obviously includes what is now the southern Philippines, right? But not so much the northern part of the Philippines. So there are these points at which, and with the Muslim sultans also, I think that they have an important role to play in how particular emergent identities get shaped somewhat differently in the Philippines than elsewhere, because in the Philippines, rather than a notion of ethnicity becoming a really dominant notion of identity, you rather get a sort of regional and kind of religious identity of, Moro Muslim South versus, Christian Visayan and Tagalog or Luzon North, right? So those are a few ways, but yeah, thanks for, and definitely the sultanates in the South are something that definitely have to be discussed, I think, in an overall narrative of Southeast Asia. Yeah, so thanks for those questions.
Thank you, Professor Thompson. So there is now another question. I believe this is for Mr. Toring. Regarding the Otley Bayer collection, if I may read, do you also have plans to include other Bayer collections from different institutions? I heard that Bayer left tons of artifacts and other materials, but no one is cataloging and archiving them until now, just like the one at the UP in Diliman. Mr. Toring?
Oh, right. Thank you very much for that question. Was it BB Monkey? Okay. The Otley Bayer collection that our team is investigating is not something we're done alone. The initiative came from the University of La Salle, the team of Dr. Demetrio, Sir Demetrio sa La Salle, and then we're not the only team cataloging the Otley Bayer collection. There's Team Cavite, which Regina Yoma is part of, and here comes Team Laguna. There's Team Bulacan, Team Tarlac. There's Team all of other provinces like Team Cordillera, and this national team. We are also collaborating with other researchers from Mindanao who could actually look into these narratives. It's just that in the Visayas currently, our team is from BSU is working into this. I hope you look forward into this. Kining BB Monkey, because the Otley Bayer collection, there is a national initiative going on. That's what I can say, and I hopefully we're actually collaborating together now, and hopefully could come up with better results for the better method, Philippine scholarship.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Turing, for your response to that question. Now, there is another question coming from still BB Monkey. I think this is for Professor Bulado. Regarding the guerrilla response during Japanese occupation, how did it contribute to the current Philippine left movement and discourse like the CPP, NPA, NDF, and other factions within the Philippine left, if there is any connection or causation?
Yeah. Although it's not really part of the scope of my study, but let me just answer that in brevity. Of course, there is always a connection between that. As you already know about the history of the Hukbalahap, even before World War II, with the Sakdalistas and the Ganap Party, they in Luzon, they were actually somehow connected with the guerrillas. But if you look at the Hukbalahap in Luzon, most of them were members of the Sakdalistas, and then eventually they were also part of the guerrillas. They were the peasants, no? So there is always a connection to that. There's a causation to that from the Sakdalistas, the Ganap Party, even way back during the Philippine Revolution. So yes, there is a clear connection between the guerrillas and eventually the Philippine left movement.
Thank you, Professor Bolado. Now, there is another question coming from Ian Dale Rios to Romeo Turing and team. If I may read, I really think this is very useful to fuel more studies in the future. The question is, can you somehow overlay a topographic map? I think it would be interesting to have a visual on the physical geographical environment.
Yes, short answer, yes, of course. We can overlay a topographic map. For the sake of presentation, because it's kind of complicated, the shape files I use for the GIS software came from the Philippine Statistics Authority. And yeah, that's probably actually one of their plans, to put the topographic map so that we can see the relationship between culture and the physical geography of these communities and how they influence life going on. That's, yeah, we are looking forward to it. I hope you also look forward, Ian, for this.
Right. So thank you. Are there some questions in the Facebook Live, Miss Marge? Are there any questions coming from our Facebook Live, or are there none?
Let me check, Jamal.
So before that, let me look into some comments here um, in our group chat in Zoom.
Right, there's a question from ACL Pineda. I sent it to your as a private message.
Okay, for a moment. I haven't received it yet, Miss Marge. Or is it here in Zoom, you mean?
Yeah, in Zoom,
Okay,
yes.
sorry.
Sorry.
So questions for the team working on the Otley Bayer. There was a comment, it was a fantastic talk. Now, there are certain points here. There is someone who tracked the archaeological studies similar to what you did in ethnography. I'd like to connect with you regarding the information. All right, so I think that there is there's a possible opportunity here for collaboration. And there is another point here. I may have missed this, but are the SHP files going to be available, Mr. Turing?
As far as I know, because the Otley Bear collection was sold to the government of Australia, and I think that's what he is talking about. The clear copies are there in Australia, not here. But the Philippine National Library was able to recover some, and that's why some of the copies are poorly scanned, and that makes the task very challenging. Um, but still, we can still work on it on what we have right now. And as speaking of collaboration, we are very much open. Actually, this is actually one of the purpose why we plot them all together in a map for future, collaborative works or to spark the interest and maybe probably research funding. Excuse me, or something like that. Yeah, and hopefully whoever you are, please you can connect to me, by email or contact me. I'm very much open for collaboration. This is a massive work and we cannot do it alone. So more people, the merrier.
Right, so this one is from Zigfred Baseran Diaz. This is still for Mr. Turing Jr. So first point, as far as I know, there is no systematic literature mapping aside from the Otley Bear collection for all scholarly papers, anthropology, archaeology, history-related, or Philippine researches. Am I wrong on this, or is there already an ongoing project done aside from what you are doing?
Um, I haven't come across. Actually, it's I don't know, but for us, I'm actually convincing my team that we're doing something ingenious in this type of project. Although I've come across with several researchers on abroad, like they're trying to map the linguistic map, and then on every plot there's a recording of the different languages. So we can try to replicate, and drawing from that idea, I got this inspiration of like plotting every literature. And actually, in the future, I think I'm trying to collect with some members of UGAT. The Pang-Aghamtao journals, for example, we can do something like this for the different ethnographies covered by our journal. And for the rest of other journals, we can also do something like this also. And probably the point here is, it's something that makes anthropology and the rest of the social sciences really interesting. Adding some millennial flair on putting another way, another approach for visual data visualization. And I hope hopefully this is the start of like going beyond the textual and speech narrative of disseminating information related to our field. And Attorney Siegfried, we look forward for more collaborations.
So there is another point still coming from Mr. Siegfried. If there is nothing done yet so far, I regard you're doing as very important work, as it not only addresses gaps in knowledge, but it also collates research and gives us an overall map database and compilation in visual form of research done. I would suggest, coming from Mr. Siegfried, that this project be expanded first to anthropology, archaeology, history-related Philippine researches, and then expanded to other research papers. A quick comment on this, Mr. Tori?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm flattered. In Bafarti, we're really happy to hear that comment. We're really looking forward to it because in a ways to, in communicating to the public, pictures really works. Like just like in the previous session, like the one people from the National Museum we're doing something like this, and I'm also crazy about maps and all of this. It's just that the passions and this profession and the vocation of research aligns. And for interested individuals who are also fancy this type of work we're doing, we are very much open to connections whatsoever.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Turing. So ladies and gentlemen, again, we thank you all for joining session D, Stories, Narratives, and Responses to Colonization. And just to summarize everything, Professor Eric Thompson presented to us his paper with the revised title, The Philippines in and from a Southeast Asian Perspective, talking about the dynamism, the influence of the Philippine archipelago to neighboring countries or neighboring cultures and vice versa through the pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial eras. And Mr. Turing was able to partake to us the Otley Bear collection and a geographical manifestation or representation of cultural data, and having to introduce to us the development of anthropology during insular government, exposed gaps manifested in the communities not covered by the collection, and a glimpse of American colonial influence in the social science researches. And Professor Bolado presented to us a research entitled Guerrilla Responses to the Collaboration Issue in Negros Oriental during the Japanese occupation, wherein he talked about the dynamics of passive and active political collaboration among political elites and occupying forces in Negros Oriental by citing experiences, narratives, stories, dilemmas, issues, conundrums, polarization, and reactions. So essentially, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you all for joining session D, and thank you so much to our esteemed presenters for partaking with us the knowledge and the scholarly work that you are able to nobly do. Thank you so much. So before we would all leave the session for lunch, may I request everyone to please turn on their cameras for a group photograph. If everyone is, for those who are comfortable of turning on their cameras, please do so that we can have a group photograph. Ms. March, would you be the one to take the photo?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So everyone, if you could turn on your cameras, put up the biggest smile, the happiest, the prettiest face, the most handsome face that you could possibly show us. So Ms. March, just give us the signal.
All right, 1, 2, 3. Isa pa.
Another one.
Ha? So, nalimikit ang tanan.
So right now, in Zoom, we have 53 participants in
Gina,
total.
do you know how to capture the whole part?
Skip na lang ka, Miss Marge, o ka ng screen.
Or skip lang?
Screen 1, screen 2, screen 3.
Sige, sige.
I think we cannot fit all in one interface. Yeah.
Wala, debris para sa kuan. Ikaw lang, Rejbe.
Naantay 3 panels. Merong 3 panels.
Hindi ko kayo bawasan.
Ronaldo, can you turn on your cameras for the picture taking? From National Museum Bohol, if you're still there. Miss Athena and Miss Audrey, can you turn on your mic? Turn on your videos. Okay. Sige. All right. So ready? 1, 2, 3. Smile. Okay. One more.
Claro gito.
50 shot. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Smile. All right. Next panel. Daghan. Marami pong walang cameras. Kindly turn on your...
May request those whose cameras are turned off to please turn them on for our group photo.
Okay lang siguro na at least makapture lang participants yung kinsa. Baka wala sila yung camera.
Probably it would interfere with bandwidth.
All right. Okay, for those who have their videos on, ready? 1, 2, 3. All right. One more. 1, 2, 3. And we have the last panel.